member's name and they will state how they vote. Good evening. I hope everyone is doing well. A couple of notes as we begin our second virtual meeting. I shared with you some guidance that was put out by the MASC this week, and just want to draw your attention to one paragraph in particular, where it speaks to the roles and responsibilities of school committees during this time. If you don't mind, I'm going to read it to you. Superintendents are facing unprecedented management challenges in their districts. These are much easier for the superintendent to navigate when a well-informed school committee is supportive. However, the role of the school committee also does not change, and there are responsibilities and decisions that continue to belong to the committee. It is as unfair to both parties to cede these responsibilities as it is to step on the management toes of the superintendent. Monitoring and making any necessary decisions regarding the FY20 budget, as well as final approval of the FY21 budget, remain the responsibility of the school committee. Any decisions regarding negotiating, implementation of temporary measures or changes to collective bargaining agreements should be committee decisions. There may be a need to change or suspend certain policies during this time. These decisions as well belong to the school committee. I also wanted to note that some people expressed concern around the timeliness of having the social emotional presentation that we're going to have tonight. And I just wanted to remind everyone that despite the closure, our ongoing work has to continue. Our FY21 budget includes many items related to social emotional learning, and as we continue to process this closure and its effects on students, the social emotional learning needs in the fall will be undoubtedly greater. So it is important for us to hear about the work that has been done as we make decisions guiding us going forward. Just as a last thing, I want to remind you of our procedures for discussion during the meeting. Please use the raise hand function, as that is the best way to be seen either by myself or Peter. If you're not sure how to do it, it's when you click on participants, you'll see your names and there's a raise hand function there. Please use that. And I will allow each member the opportunity to ask one question after each sort of presentation, and then I will return to them for additional questions after everyone that wanted a chance has had an opportunity. Okay, there's quite a few things on the agenda this evening, things that we have to make big decisions about, and we do have the executive session scheduled afterwards. So I am going to be paying attention to the time. I just want to note that for people to check our two towns' websites for the most up-to-date information about the elections and annual town meetings. Both Acton and Boxborough's elections have been postponed to June 2nd. And then I wanted to note that per policy BEDH, members of the public may speak for up to 3 minutes on items not included on this agenda. Comments regarding items on the agenda should be made during that part of the meeting. Typically, the committee administration will not respond to comments during public participation. Please use the chat feature if you are watching from home or participating by home. Please use that chat feature to indicate your desire to participate. So I guess I'll ask if there's anybody in the public that wishes to speak. Seeing no hands raised. Is that correct, Peter? You don't see anybody, do you?
I do not see anybody with hands up, no.
Okay. Do we have our high school representatives on there?
I see Michael.
Wait, someone, I thought, nope, someone.
Right. I am looking.
Yeah, I see Michael. Michael, if you'd like to speak. Oh, and Charles Wang is here also. So if one of you would like to speak or both of you would like to speak, now is the time. All right, Michael, it looks like you're unmuted. So if you'd like to share with us some updates.
Yeah, I mean, Charles probably has, we didn't really coordinate. We don't really have the capacity to, but yeah, I'm reading over Mr. Light's memo right now about containing things about how we're transitioning educationally regrading. Pass-fail has been the topic of conversation, I'd say predominant topic of conversation among high school students. It's just, I think it's generally well received, but it also depends by class, I guess. I mean, that's what I would tell you more or less, that there's a lot of variance among how teachers are approaching it. Some are not really assigning much of anything. Some are assigning maybe here's a video and say, did you notice anything interesting? Some are assigning more formalized worksheets, and that, I mean, it evens out sort of, but obviously it's still less than a full workload, even on the more engaged teacher, a more intense teacher.
Yeah, and in terms of grading, I totally agree with what Michael's saying about how it totally varies with class. And I think the main idea is that most seniors would say that would disagree would agree with pass fail, and that's because
Like, because I don't care.
I know this isn't stereotypical with every senior, but like what I'm seeing is that some seniors like would like to relax after such a stressful college application season, and by having pass fail, you're able to put less effort into classes while getting the same results. So I think that's why it varies by class. Now with maybe freshmen, sophomores, or juniors, I think the main viewpoint is that pass fail is more negative because the advantage to having a standard four-term ABC grading period is that you have some time to bounce back after maybe like a bad term in terms 1 or 2. So yeah, that's my whole spiel on.
Charles, do you have anything to add, like aside from academics, like social, emotion, like how Zoom's going, since Google Meet apparently is not safe for kids?
I think Zoom. I think it's harder for teachers to notify their students about online mediums such as Zoom or we're not using Google Meet anymore, but I think it's more difficult for teachers to notify their students about Zoom for 2 reasons mainly. One, sometimes teachers might have like fun posts in Google Classroom. Like for example, I know one of my teachers is having like who's the most overrated singer, etc. So all these nonsense posts, I won't call them nonsense, but like all these like extra posts might confuse students sometimes. And also with Zoom, I think that, well, I know this is going to change in the future, but like right now, many teachers are planning Zoom meetings for at the same slot as other teachers. So us students sometimes have the predicament of like choosing between which class to go to first. But I know that will change in the future because I've heard that there's going to be like a set schedule for teachers to hold Zoom meetings.
Great. All right. Thank you, guys. Is that all you'd like to share? I appreciate that you've come to the meeting tonight to listen in. I think it's wonderful to see our students participating. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts. Peter, did you want to do an update now, or did you want to do that under the school closure updates after the presentation, after the first presentation?
No, I'll say a couple words now, and then we'll save most of the actual update for the presentation. You know, I just want to, as I did last time, I want to start by thanking all of our faculty and staff and administrators for all of the work that they've done over the last, several weeks. I can't underestimate for anyone what an incredibly challenging time this has been. I know we have, Amy Bizowitz is here tonight. She's not usually at all of our school committee meetings, but I know firsthand our leadership team has been working, 12, 13, 14 hours a day for weeks on end, trying to make sure that we have everything up and running that we need. I just can't thank all of them enough. This has been truly one of the most challenging times any of us have ever seen in our educational careers. We know that extends to all of our students and families as well. We're seeing firsthand the level of stress in everyone's homes. We're seeing parents being, thrust into the role of half parent, half educator, half nurse. And, when you get to 3 halves, it just doesn't all add up. It's been taxing on everyone. It takes its toll, and I just want to make sure everyone gets recognized for all of the work that they've done. I want to also just talk briefly to what it means to have a core value of equity. I think, when we talk about core values, we always plan our core values in the best of times. And when we plan the core values, we talk about and think about what we want to aspire to as a district and the values that we're going to espouse. But I think as we encounter one of these really challenging times, and probably the most in any of our lives, insofar as education goes, I think now's the time when we really are challenged to think about what it means to hold equity as truly one of our core values. And, it's not just a value that you bring forward in the best of times. It actually needs to be a value that in the worst of times, you hold so near and dear to your heart that you begin and end all of your planning thinking about the students who you may not be able to reach. And that what that means, I think, is that we need to think so deeply about the students that might be harder to reach or may not have the same ability to access our education system, and work 2, 3, 4, 20, and 30 times harder to make sure that we're providing opportunities for all of our students, especially in these challenging times. I've been thinking about that more and more in the last 2 weeks than I think I ever have, because we have a number of families in our community who are just going to be hurting over the long haul here. We're going to have families who become jobless. We're going to have students who may not have access to internet service, reliable technology in their homes. We're going to have families that may not speak English, and so the communications we put out are harder to access. The work teachers put out is harder to access. And when families are thrust into the role of education provider as well in the home, that just makes it doubly and triply hard for those families. So I would just say, as we go through, I just wanted to take this one moment and remind all of the members of our education community that we have so deeply committed to equity as one of our core values that we never want to put ourselves in a position where we're pitting any of our children against other children in the district. And we need to make sure we're always here for every single one of our kids. So thank you for letting me pontificate for a couple of minutes. I rarely do it. I rarely do that. But I thought this was an important moment just to make sure we come back to that and put that front and center.
Thank you, Peter. All right. So the first thing on our agenda tonight is a presentation from Nate Levenson from the District Management Group on the social emotional program evaluation that was done earlier this year. So this had been work that went on for a while, and we are fortunate to be able to hear their thoughts and recommendations for plans moving forward.
And I am going to promote some of our attendees to be panelists. And I'm looking to make sure I have the right people. I'm going to bring in Dawn first. And then I'm looking through.
I see Nate on there.
Yeah, I do too.
Jenny's in it as an attendee. I don't know if you want to move her to panel.
I think she can probably join us, huh?
Yeah. We might want to do that.
Hello, Nate.
Hello, Peter.
Hello. Are you alone in presenting tonight?
I am.
Okay. Is there anyone else we should have on screen here now? Or do we have everyone?
There's
Hello, Jenny. Do we have everyone now? I think we do. So I'm going to, Nate, you should now be able to share your screen. Dawn, I don't know if you want to do the introductions for Nate before he gets going, because I know you've been working front and center on social emotional review, and I want to see if you have any words to say before we get started.
Sure. We engaged Nate and his group in the fall to spend some time with us at the district level. Besides the fact that we're obligated to conduct periodic programmatic evaluations of a variety of things that we do, we also wanted to recognize the substantial contributions that the community and the resources that the school committee has continued to dedicate to social emotional learning and mental health in the district just in the 4 short years that I've been here. So Nate and his team have some things that they're going to share. Some of the things that are celebrations that we are struggling to hear because we want to get right in and work on the stuff we need to work on. But he's going to share all of that stuff with you today. So thanks for being here, Nate.
Great. It's my pleasure. Everybody able to hear me? Perfect. My pleasure to be here tonight. I think this discussion just so underscores what the new normal or the new abnormal looks and feels like. Totally appreciate some folks wondering, why are we having this discussion tonight? Certainly my perspective is the challenges that we were asked to help you all think about are still here. They're going to be here when schools open up again. I think they are going to potentially influence your budget, and certainly all indications are we're going to have more challenges, not fewer. So as odd as it may be, I also greatly appreciate the board's willingness to continue this conversation, even in these very stressful and unprecedented times. As far as the format, Peter said I had about 3.5 hours to go over this tonight, but having spent 6 years on a school board, I thought I would limit it to about 20 minutes, leave time for your questions. I know you have a very full agenda. With that, I am going to share my screen. I know you have the presentation. I'm not going to go through every slide. Some of it is just there for your reading pleasure, but I definitely wanted to give you the overview of our key findings. So bear with me as I get this shared. Let's see. And I'm hoping at this point you are seeing a very large white slide that says expanding and strengthening social, emotional, and behavioral supports. Everybody there? All right, the technology is working. I think the most important and the only thing I want to share as far as preamble about the district management group and the approach we took to this review is to make one important statement, and that everything that we do, everything that you do, and every recommendation or opportunity we share today had to meet 3 conditions. One, that it had to be really, really good for your kids. Second, and that I think is not a surprise to anybody. It's why you get up in the morning. It's why we get up in the morning. But the second is that it also has to be really, really good for your staff. An idea that is both good for your kids but not helpful or makes the life and the work of your staff harder didn't seem like a good idea, because as you will hear, your staff are stretched thin, and we need to make their work life easier at the same time that we're making the services more impactful for kids. And thirdly, we wanted to do those first 2 things in a cost-effective manner. And so everything we're going to share tonight should be great for kids, good for staff, and reasonable for the budget. The process we went through was extensive. We spent days interviewing hundreds of people. People were incredibly honest, incredibly open, reflective, thoughtful. We observed classrooms. We asked folks to share with us what they did for a week through a schedule sharing tool. We looked at a lot of data, and our sense is we got to know you pretty darn well. The feedback from the Guiding Coalition, when we've shared these results, seemed to echo that we got to know you pretty darn well. And just want to point out that even though we looked very, very broadly and very deeply, our goal was to come back to you with just 2 short lists, because a long list isn't helpful. One short list is some commendations, things that are going well, because good news never gets enough attention. And second, in this case, 6 opportunities for improvement. I will warn you in advance, even though 6 is a short list, it is more than you can do at once. And so there is still a step to be done about thinking about where do you start. But our recommendation is that even though 6 is not as long, a particularly long list, all of these are major lifts. So let's talk about the good news. 5 things really stood out. There were many things that were very strong, but the first being that staff members are hardworking, committed, and care about the well-being of their students is an understatement. Your staff cares so deeply about their students and all students. It was really great to see. Second, the district as a whole has made very significant commitments to the social, emotional, behavioral needs of students through a multitude of channels: programming, professional development, staffing, policy updates. I'm going to make a confession. We do a lot of this work, and when we're being interviewed or we're starting a project, people like Don and people like Peter all across the country say, and you know, Nate, we are really committed to social and emotional well-being. To be honest, everybody says that. You all have actually been living that, walking the walk, putting your resources, your time, and your energy, and you're definitely at the high end of the districts we work with who are truly committed well beyond words to the social, emotional, and behavioral well-being of your students. So you all should feel really good about that. The schools have worked very hard to create safe and stigma-free environments for students to talk and access mental health services. I think that really flows from the second commendation. We've also seen, and it was nice to see, strong coordination between school administrators and the mental health staff to identify, monitor, and address needs. School-based leaders are fully invested in this. They are working closely with their teachers and with their specialized staff. And last commendation is we saw a very strong relationship between the greater community and the schools, which is really important because, as you will see, some of the challenges and services you want to provide and steps you want to take go beyond just the realm of a school and really do move into the whole community. Taken together, these 5 commendations are significant. They're an incredibly powerful foundation to build off of. And I think it sets you up well to be able to address what comes next in this kind of continuous improvement look at meeting the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of students. 6 opportunities for consideration. We will walk through them individually. I will spend more time on some than others. And again, leave time for your questions to go deeper in any place you want. The first opportunity is to provide greater focus and support. So I want to underscore both the word focus and support to general education teachers to more proactively address the Tier 1 social, emotional, and behavioral needs of students. I try to avoid jargon. I know I used some right there. So let me define for you what we mean by Tier 1. Tier 1 are the supports and practices and procedures that you do for all students. It's not just kids who have particular needs or specialized needs or greater needs, but this is the everyday work of classroom teachers interacting with virtually 100% of their students. That's Tier 1. What we saw and heard is 2 things. The research, the best practices say that to build really strong climate to address social and emotional needs of kids, that the day in, day out interactions with teachers, the classroom experience is a really important part of creating strong supports for social emotional learning and success. What that means is that classroom teachers are already really busy, have an important role to play in creating and teaching and living the social emotional supports for kids. That's the best practice. Current practice, and what we heard from your classroom teachers directly, is 2 things. The first is, I will say that they would self-identify as not being 100% sure what and how to do that. That is not from a lack of people trying to help them, but know that you're starting from a place where classroom teachers are saying, hey, I don't have all the skills, training, knowledge, expertise to do this. As a result, what has evolved is classroom teachers looking fairly quickly to your highly specialized staff to help in situations that in a better world, in a more sustainable way, the classroom teachers would be able to address that routine day in and day out needs so that your specialized staff are focusing more on what are called Tier 2 and Tier 3, the greater needs. Now, what's interesting is that I've shared with you, and I'm confident that I'm accurate because your teachers all told us so, that they are feeling underskilled, undertrained. They're not 100% sure what to do. That is not due to a lack of effort in trying to train them, give them tools, but it's in some ways it's just the opposite. And we'll talk about this more in the second opportunity. But acknowledge that they don't have the training and skills that they want, but to also acknowledge it's not due to lack of effort. There's also an element where there's the tools and training that they've gotten. They don't necessarily, not all of them, not enough of them are taking full ownership that this should be their job, and that perhaps it should be the jobs of the specialists. And then a fairly common refrain is that as you have had this very significant focus, a sustained focus on social emotional behavioral supports, the details of that focus have changed year to year. And the follow through, the sticking with something long enough to get really, really good at it and to build the confidence, the level of confidence that the teachers need hasn't always been there. So what does this mean? It means that classroom teachers have to be part of the social emotional supports. They should be focusing on tier 1, not so much the more severe and significant needs. And by acknowledging that their skills aren't where they need to be, I think you want to look at perhaps identifying particular teachers in the class who are currently in the district, classroom teachers who do have great skills in this area. Some learned it, some developed it, and finding ways in which they can help their colleagues through mentoring, model classrooms, or serving as coaches, and also thinking about having dedicated social and emotional instructional coaches to support teachers to build their skill set. And I think it'll help your teachers, it will help your students. Now, if you're thinking this might make some sense, and I hope you do, opportunity 2 is an immediate and necessary corollary. And this says to create a unified vision of social emotional behavioral services and programming at the district level, and to have a continuum of services that follows across grades and levels. I'm going to make a second confession. Not everybody will like this opportunity, because what this says is that if you're going to build capacity, if you're going to help people get good at something, if you're going to give them training and tools and supports, you have to create some focus. You can't train and support if every classroom, every grade, and every school is doing something different, because you will never have the bandwidth to help people get really, really good at it. What we saw is that there is not a district-wide shared vision. There is a district-wide shared commitment, but every school, and to some degree, grade and classroom, has thought through how to bring that shared commitment to reality, and that has created a very wide range of activities and made it very difficult to train and support the implementation. You will also see that district-wide vision for students with more significant needs. We didn't see a clear pre-K through 12 path. Again, it really varied greatly from grade level, elementary, middle, and high school. So 2 things that I want to share with you to kind of reinforce this. What you're seeing is an example. And this example said, imagine a district is trying to focus on just 6 social emotional behavioral needs. And mind you, 6 is a lot fewer than you are currently trying to support. But if you tried to do that at elementary, middle, and high school, because the way you would implement it is different, and acknowledging that some of these areas have a tier 1 solution, a tier 3 solution, some have a tier 2 solution, that these a list of 6 quickly becomes 39. 39 things that are hard that you're trying to do simultaneously. You would never do that academically. And to be totally candid, this was an example with 6. which led to 39, you currently have a lot more than 6 and a lot more than 39. So your folks are spread very thin. And here's how this happened. And it didn't happen because people weren't thoughtful or caring, but as social and emotional behavioral needs first surfaced, schools saw the need the fastest. It was in their classroom every day. Schools went out and went to conferences and read books and did trainings, and schools created their own plans. I know that historically you've had fairly independent-minded schools as well. And what happened was each school, and sometimes even each grade, created their own plan. And none of those plans are necessarily bad. They all seem pretty darn good, but they're different. To be able to do things well and really well, you will have to move towards a more district-wide approach, more commonality. Doesn't necessarily mean it should be 100% lockstep, but a narrower focus, greater commonality, so that you can better implement and better support your teachers in implementing them. What we're looking at here is a look at the specialized programs you have for students with more significant needs. And I think the biggest takeaway here is this is alphabet soup. If you're looking at this and you're not 100% sure how do the junior high programs nicely connect to the elementary programs and how does that carry over to the high school programs, we're not sure either. Neither are your teachers. Not all of your parents are either. All these programs are good programs, but they were developed, they reflect a kind of a school or grade level development, fairly independent of what the next grade level was going to do. And so in both these opportunities, there is value in thinking about this from a district perspective, because all of your kids are going to move through pre-K to 12, or the vast majority of them. So what's the potential next steps? It's really what I've talked about. It's creating greater clarity, deciding what should be common across all schools, acknowledging that schools will also need to have some things that are different. It's developing district-wide approach, creating a limited number of district-wide programs, and getting really, really good at doing a few things. And then you can move on to doing the next few. The last piece that I think these first three make a nice package of systemic kind of big picture thoughts. The third one is to consistently implement the child study and student support process to eliminate the variation in social, emotional, behavioral intervention practices, data usage, roles, and responsibilities. Here, I do want to make a cautionary note that as an organization, the district management group is completely agnostic around whether you should have a strong central office or strong schools that are quite different. We work with districts everywhere along that spectrum. We're not bringing a philosophical approach, but we're saying where you are today and the implementation challenges and the stresses that your teachers are feeling, this more systemic district-wide approach is going to help you get to where you want to be faster, quicker, and easier. So it is a practical recommendation, not a philosophical one. Your child study and student support teams, these are your specialists, these are your special educators, these are school psychologists, counselors. They're really talented, really dedicated, and really stressed. And part of what is adding to the stress is how much difference there is from school to school. And working with these teams of folks and working with school principals very much collaboratively, trying to think about what is the clearest, best roles and responsibilities, what are processes that make the most sense, train people on it. Again, I think a parallel to those first two, where if everybody does good things but differently, it becomes very hard to do, and then they become not nearly as good as they could be. And again, the next steps are collectively and very inclusively think about roles and responsibilities, who does what, how should the CST, SST process work, and allow your staff to create structures and processes that are more common, run more smoothly. So if the first three are what I describe as very systemic, the next couple become a little more specific. Number 4 is a fairly narrowly defined opportunity, but one that really surfaced in our conversations. And that is to create a consensus in the understanding of the causes and supports needed to address anxiety and depression. Your staff, and this is true of communities like yours everywhere in the country, your kids have greater stress, there is more anxiety, depression is on the rise everywhere, so you have a lot of company in this regard. Your teachers and administrators know this, and they're trying to address it. So that's all the good news. The less than excellent news is people have really different opinions as to what is the cause of this increase in stress, anxiety, and depression. As a result, they have very, very different opinions and thoughts on how to address it. So depending on who you go to and who you talk to, different causes leading to different recommendations, and there really wasn't, to the extent that you would want, a deep shared theory of action, a theory of what's the cause, and therefore what would be a reasonable intervention. And to be fair, that some of the interventions, and I'll get specific in 10 seconds, some of the solutions actually get other people very, very nervous. So just a couple examples. Some people shared, they think a major source of the anxiety and depression is social media and the plugged in world. And therefore a solution might be limit their use or to teach kids how to better use. But others felt that there was too many APs and too much academic pressure. And some people therefore felt, hey, either limit access to the number of APs or the number of high rigor courses. Other people thought that was very much a step in the wrong direction. And that's just a very small sampling of the range of opinion on both cause and solution. So our recommendation is, in collaboration with district social and emotional experts, to educate all staff in the causes, and typically there's more than one, and the appropriate supports, which again would be matched perhaps to specific causes, so that there's greater understanding and a more shared approach to addressing this need. And also, the recommendation that these are hard conversations to have, both for staff and students and parents for that matter. So to make sure you're creating a forum to have these conversations. Number 5, and I will be done in about 3 minutes. Number 5 is to align the work of mental health and student support staff to make their jobs easier and more effective. When we met with your folks, they care so much, they work really hard, but they spend a lot of time in meetings and paperwork. They are asked to do a gazillion things, some of which play to their strengths and some do not. There's a sense that some workloads are greater than others. And this is all about how do you help really good, smart people have more sustained work life. It's our belief that you can, in fact, streamline meetings and paperwork. They're not going to go away, but every minute that you're in a meeting or doing paperwork is a minute you're not with kids. We also think that staff are tasked with doing a lot of things, and that if you were to ask your staff just a simple question, what are you really, really good at? They will tell you, and they really are good at it. And they will also tell you what are not their strengths. And by allowing them to play to their strengths, so they spend more of their day delivering the services they're very strong at, and their colleagues who have differing strengths get to spend more of their day doing that, both quality of services go up and work-life balance work satisfaction goes up. I think we've shared all of that. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, this last opportunity is far bigger than what the schools can do on their own. And this says to partner with the community to address the challenges associated with changing demographics, ensuring that voices are heard from all the representatives of your entire community. You know far better than I, the demographics of your community have changed substantially over time. Our sense is that the district and the community are proactively taking steps to be responsive to those changes, but there's still more work to be done. And that the moving forward, and I want to, that it's going to be work of the school, but also work of the community to address the changing dynamics which are contributing to and a factor in how you're going to plan to meet the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of kids. I just want to give one last comment before I stop, as part of our work coming up to speed, we did read the superintendent's entry report. And I just, as a former superintendent, just need to acknowledge both the insight and honesty that we found in that report, addressing some of the changing culture of the community. And I think it set such a positive tone for certainly the work we did, saying that these are real issues, but we can talk about them openly and address them forthright. This is very rare to see such honest, thoughtful, and I think appropriately worded discussion. So let me pause there. I'm going to stop sharing, come back so you can see me, and be happy to take any questions you have.
So just as a reminder, from the process that we used last time, I think we said, you could either use the raise hand feature for committee members first on the participants tab at the bottom of the screen. If you open that participants, you can digitally raise your hand, or if all else fails, you can actually just raise your hand.
I can see that Paul has a question. So Paul, why don't you start us off?
Yes, thank you, Nate. When I read through this, I was very, very interested to hear what you had to report. One thing that I think we as a committee talked about years ago was your item number 1, the area that we could use some work in. Mm-hmm. My takeaway from that is the teacher using teachers as mentors. Mm-hmm. Was that issue kind of flushed out? Were we able to identify teachers who were willing to serve as mentors and other teachers willing to accept them?
So 3 thoughts, and I'll do this briefly. So one is, this stems from the realization that many of your teachers are saying, I need more skills, training, and support. They've also said, and we see this everywhere, that kind of bring in the outside company, do a couple days of training, feels good. It is not fundamentally how teachers learn deeply and change their behavior. And so we know that teachers learn and build skills much stronger through coaching and from people they know. We also know that you have teachers today who are really skilled at this. It wasn't that every teacher we interviewed said, I need help. You have folks who know it. You have folks who want to know it. And we know adult learning is very strong when it's coming from colleagues. So that's what led to that opportunity. We did not specifically say, hey, I could tell you this is a list of teachers. Everything we've learned about your staff is they want to help each other. They take this topic seriously. And we wanted to acknowledge that the expertise that we think you need is already under the roofs of all your buildings.
Thanks, Nate. All right, Nora. Nora, you need to.
Hi. Thank you. I thought this was really thorough, and I really appreciated the way that you incorporated so many different voices and really articulated, I think, a lot of the sort of dilemma, I guess, of different perspectives that we have around what is emotional health and what is success and what are we looking for in our students. One of the things that I was really happy to see was the emphasis on creating a unified vision, a uniform vision for the district to help kids as they move between grade levels and also between schools as they're advancing. And I think that really meshes so nicely with our superintendent's entry plan and his vision as well. So it was good to hear that the teachers also are looking for that, and that's coming from, from the teachers too. What is the next step in that? How have you seen districts come up with what the unified vision would be? Kind of wondering about that.
Sure, I can share a few thoughts. And I also I appreciate that this seemed helpful. When I said folks want this, I want to be really clear. Some folks do. Everybody who works in more than one school, everybody who is looking at the needs of the entire district, they definitely want this. If I am a principal, some wanted it, some do not, being honest. If I'm a teacher, yes, everybody should do the same thing, but it's a thing I'm already doing. So I really want to be honest with you that your kids and ultimately your staff and your principals will absolutely benefit from this commonality of practice because you can get good at it and you can support it, but it will be a little rocky. And I think, well, that this is not just around social, emotional, and behavioral supports. It is a philosophical shift. What we have seen is basically 3 steps. One is a declaration that you're going to do this, because people need to know whether this is happening or not. That may be the only top-down aspect of commonality. Commonality is not required to be top-down. Actually, it's best when it isn't. But the decision to be common, yeah, that probably is other people whose faces I'm seeing. Then what to become common on should be highly inclusive. Your principals and teams of teachers working with the central office have to collectively say, this is our best wisdom, this is our best judgment. You have so many things currently in the district, you should pick some of the things that are already here. Don't go looking for new ones, please. And then as you make those collective decisions and start to roll them out, you need to have this interesting balance. We use the term non-negotiables. There are some things that are too important. They have to be common everywhere, and you need to be really explicit about that. And then you also need to acknowledge that there are differences in schools. And there has to be room for some differences around the edges, but not at the core. And then lastly, most importantly, the reason for commonality wasn't because one school had a better idea than another. It's because the implementation was problematic. So as you move through and agree on commonality, you have to get excellent at implementation. Otherwise, there was no point in all those other steps that came before. And it takes time, unfortunately. It's not a meeting, a memo, and a rollout. It's a lot of conversation.
Okay, sorry, my internet keeps going in and out and it ends up freezing everybody. Maya had her hand up, Diane had her hand up next, and then Maya, and then Ginny, I see you.
Thank you, Nate. I was really appreciative of this, just the way that it was structured. It was very easy to read and move through this and really understand a very vast amount of information. So thank you for that.
And you really would have liked the 3.5-hour version.
Kind of, yeah. So first, I just want to say this is part of Peter's superintendent goals. So I think it's important that they be dealt with now, because the whole process, frankly, is becoming derailed, and more as this school closure gets pushed out. So I won't be surprised if we have some guidance from MASC on what to do at the end of the year when we everything's come to a grinding halt. So I do appreciate that you've come. I think this is a really important topic. I was a bit surprised to hear that all of the causes of depression and anxiety seem to focus on environmental things and not on an internal kind of, for lack of a better word, a pathological state. Depression and anxiety are states of being and mind that impair function. And then when you meet with environmental stimuli that can help or it can not help, then you have this kind of perfect storm. So I think the aligning understanding, I think, is really important. I think to leverage family partnerships in this area is critical because, frankly, I think a lot of parents know more than a lot of the educators, just simply because they've had to deal with it for so long in some cases. So the one thing that I want to ask you is, it's really, so we had a presentation in 2017 in May, and it was it was not as comprehensive as yours. But the takeaway, especially from the demographics of our community, was kind of the same. Like, we have increasing numbers of groups whose performance is low, and we have diverse approaches in schools, within and across schools, and this presents challenges for the support staff who struggle. I'm taking this right from the report, to find common strategies and practices for students who have common needs, but who come from classrooms and schools with diverse instructional styles and contexts. And so at the end, they kind of said, we have to ask ourselves, are we a system of schools or a school system? Mm-hmm. And this is a question that just continues to just, it's just the most important question when I think about Acton Boxborough, because we have open enrollment and we've allowed our elementary schools, at least, to develop really like their own personalities. I don't think everyone agrees with me about that, but there are some commonalities, but there really has, I think it is just so important to have the locus of control as close to the student as possible. So when you say create I know the key word here is inconsistency in unified vision, inconsistency in aligned understandings of what depression and anxiety is, inconsistency in child study team practice. Like, I understand that, and that's not so good, but I want to kind of, I want to have a deeper understanding of how to think about centralizing ideas like social emotional skill building and programming without really taking the control away where it really needs to be in order to benefit students the most.
So, I mean, you ask a big question, I'm going to give a short answer. As a country, I've worked now in 28 states with over 200 school districts. So I've gotten to see a lot. We have gone through this pendulum swinging of very tight central offices, or incredibly let 1,000 flowers bloom, and every school is different. And we've been doing this for about 15 years. What we are seeing, and I've worked in everyone along that spectrum, we are seeing sanity move towards somewhere in the middle, which is often where sanity lives. And we need to acknowledge that you have some differences from school to school. You also need to acknowledge that they funnel into singular schools. The issue that I would put before you all is that every difference you see from one school to another, it is different for one of two reasons. I'm simplifying the world. It is different because the kids in that school are different and needed something different. And I call that a student-centered difference. And then there are also many, many differences that are there for historic reasons. because nobody said we had to do it the same way. Because I went to a particular conference, and quite honestly, if I got tickets to a different conference, I would have bought a different program, or I would have rolled something out. And what happens is that we, particularly if you like what you're doing, and this is not lying, but it's human nature, you say, hey, we are doing what we're doing because our kids are different. And sometimes that is true, and sometimes, no, it's just different. And I think the art form of leadership for certainly for Peter, and I think for the board, is to think about what are the things that should be universal, because they're so darn important. What are the things that should be common because they're so darn hard to do any other way? And what are the things that are different because your kids need it to be different? And if you can look at it in those three lights, I think you can guide yourself kind of down the middle. But I think you need to avoid assuming that every difference is there because of the students. And you definitely need to hopefully acknowledge how difficult some things are to implement on a school by school basis. But it's not an all or nothing for sure.
All right, thank you. Maya. Maya.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
I was so absorbed in listening that I have to reformulate my question. When you address some of the differences and lack of unity or convergence around many of the schools, this is a two-part question. Do you also think that is true for the upper schools, the junior high and high school?
So I think there are two different things I'd say about that. So when we think about, a district-wide vision, most of your students start in the elementary school, move to the middle school, then go to the high school. And for them, they benefit from having continuity. So having a through line, having some similarities is really helpful for them, particularly for kids who are struggling in one form or another. Because you don't want, transitions in and of themselves are difficult. You make transitions even more difficult when rules, expectations, norms, language change. So I think there's value to having coherence, elementary, middle, and high school. Obviously, it's not completely the same because the way you implement these things are differently. That's first. The second is, as you get into the middle and high school, we did see more variation, I will say, teacher by teacher. That it was where I think the elementary schools have kind of a more declared, this is our approach. And one school may have declared a different approach than another. At the middle and high school is a little more room by room variation. Then it would be hard to say this is the high school's approach, or this is the middle school's approach to some of these things. One group of teachers shared, and it was interesting, like how this happens. You've rolled out a lot of efforts through the years. The training tends to be high in the first year, not so much in the second and third and fourth year. And then the new thing comes in and there's more training. So part of what you're seeing and why this varies almost teacher from teacher, if I was hired 3 years ago, I got trained in and I'm trying to do X. But the person who got hired last year, they weren't there for that training. They got training on something more recently, and that's kind of what they're doubling down on. Because you have, in fact, done more training and more programs and more supports than any one person could implement. And so people have chosen from those choices or chosen from what they first learned. And that's where I think in the middle and high school, the variation comes.
Thank you for that insight. The second part of my question would be about implementation. Are you optimistic that we can do this in a time frame that is will be reasonable and effective, and also within that streamlining or unification or convergence of vision, will teachers feel additionally pulled for more training and therefore be, essentially out of classroom and in more different types of training and meetings and mentoring and such?
So I think I heard at least 3 questions there. So one, let me talk about the time frame. You can start, I normally say you can start tomorrow, but it would help to actually have your schools open. You can start soon. You can make a real difference in 6 months to a year. And you're still going to be working on this 5 years from today. I mean, it is a long haul, but you can start to see things different reasonably quickly. Second, will teachers thank you or hate you? Not that they would ever hate you. And I would say that all depends on 2 things, process and implementation. If you have an inclusive process, they understand why you're doing it and they have voice, and they understand the decisions you've made, even if it wasn't the one I was hoping for. Our experience is people can get that, but they wanted a chance to hear and they wanted to understand your thinking. Second, and probably even more importantly, if let's say you went with the coaching, let's say you had their peers who are very strong come into their classroom and help them on a Monday, and it was helpful, they will thank you Monday night. Conversely, you pull them into a training on an early release or on a PD day, and they say, whoa, that's just one new thing that I don't know how to do when this guy disappeared. They will not say thank you. They want help. They really do. That was a universal. If you can do a few things well and be helpful to them, morale goes up. But if you try to do this without being inclusive, or with what I will call the traditional outside person who's really, really smart, sometimes it's even me, who comes in for a day and says, hey, here's what you should do. Here's some great videos. Here's some great exercises. Here's a good PowerPoint. Here's a book. See you later. That's not helpful. It's actually more frustrating. So I think how you do it matters more than, that's going to be the biggest determiner whether teachers find this productive or stressful.
All right, thank you. Jenny, I know you had your hand up, and then John.
Thank you. I really appreciate your presentation and your thoughts. And I just want to say that as somebody who's been a parent in this district for well over a decade, it really rings true to me in a way that Peter's entry findings did. So, that makes it very credible to me. And I'm really interested. I don't know how unique we are in terms of the demographic changes that we've experienced and where we are, and the tension that Peter identified and reflected about this perceived tension between social emotional learning and the social emotional needs of our students on the one hand, which some people perceive to be at odds with academic excellence and achievement. And I have found in many conversations and communications I've had that this is a tension that is cleaving our district. And I have not really understood how it is that we can, move forward in a way that does not, divide us, which is so important because we are such a diverse community. And so that's, I'm just really interested on your thoughts and experiences, if you've ever come across that tension before and how it can be dealt with successfully.
So two things. So one is you are fairly unique. We see changing demographics everywhere. So 80% of the districts I work with have changing demographics. So that's not unique, but your particular mix of change and the rate is, in our work in doing this study, we did look for like districts, Palo Alto and some of the Silicon Valley districts, and we came across some research studies there that really, they could have written it about you all. And so other people are definitely dealing with this. they were unfortunately had more emphasis on the problem than the solution. What we've seen and is the path forward is going to be nuanced. And what I mean by that is that, and this is again why we said getting a shared vision around the causes of anxiety is going to be important, because this issue of social and emotional versus academic excellence really reared its head in that discussion of anxiety and depression. Our sense is that the path has to embrace high levels of academic achievement, has to embrace significant commitment to rigor and excellence, but to do that in a way that does reduce tension, does reduce stress. And this way to reduce the stress cannot be to reduce the rigor, the high levels of achievement. I have come across, not where it's been a demographic shift, but there are a handful of school systems that are incredibly high performing and modestly mellow at the same time. I mean, it takes years, it takes culture, how you grade, what you measure in class, homework policies, a lot of these things that can still maintain very high academic expectations, but also perhaps moderate workload. But I do think that you need to do both and not try to argue that one is more important than the other, or we've got to give up one to get the other. And that's not a philosophy. That is my honest assessment that the community will not come together if you place your bet on one or the other. Wish I had an easier answer for that one.
John?
Let me begin by explaining why I was wearing my mask. That is to norm the appearance of people wearing masks, because I think that's going to be important going forward. And that is, of course, part of building community. And I thank Angie for making masks for herself and Paul, and hope everybody, as we go forward, will look at this as one more step that we can take to improve the course of the pandemic. When I was 18 years old, I took a civil service exam. And on that examination, there was a true-false question. And true-false, of course, is always the worst kind of question. The question was apparently simple. Most people appreciate constructive criticism. And I thought, and I said, well, it's the civil service exam. It must be true. And as luck would have it, my father knew the head of the civil service. And I talked to him and he said, well, I can't tell you the answer. He said, but of course, everyone knows that most people do not appreciate constructive criticism. So I wish it were true that it was easy to provide, people feedback, that they were in fact open to that they were willing to make themselves vulnerable, as Peter did in his entry findings. I think that's not realistic the case, but I do think that part of the way forward is for each of us as individuals to show, our own vulnerabilities and acceptance of our humanities, because it's really through that modeling of the fact that I can accept my many, many mistakes, that our students can work their way through some of their failures to their future successes. I think the other thing is, your comments were extremely lucid. As a happy reader of reports, although I love, of course, the million, slide deck PowerPoint, the art of a report which supports the PowerPoint, is also something that I think adds to the ability of a product to be durable over time. And so I would encourage you, as you're putting together projects like this and talking to districts about what they might or might not like, that along with the deck and your eloquence would come, a report that would get another part of the audience. And then I think the last thing I wanted to touch on is there was a contrast between Peter's open remarks to attempt to serve every single student and your clear direction at the beginning of this presentation that your attempt to do everything will in fact cause you to do nothing well. And that's a real tension that will exist. So, I personally will take to heart, this idea that we need to pick some things that we can do well now, realizing that we'll leave on the table some things that we need to do later.
All right. Thanks, Sean. Angie, I see that you still have your hand up, and absolutely you can ask a question. Michael, if you have a question, you certainly can ask a question. And I think Amy hasn't asked a question yet, but I just want to remind people, like, we are already, we are supposed to be starting ongoing business, and we have 2 more presentations to go. So if you could just restrict your remarks to actual questions that need to be asked while we have Nate presenting to us, it would be appreciated. All right, Angie, go ahead.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, I really like how you structured the question, the outcome. And my question actually is short, because as we are doing the virtual meeting now, and we're doing practice the social distance now, when you're doing this evaluation, and the fact is our student is live partial of their life virtually. So when you're doing this evaluation for the social emotional, is that part has been taken into consideration, as well as the recommendation and implementation?
Yeah, so great question. So as we talked to folks, and I think one of the things that about this whole report, this whole topic, is the social emotional behavioral needs of kids don't just live in schools. They live on their devices, they live at home, they live after school. And we did try to think about all of that. And clearly, particularly the 6th opportunity says that this is bigger than the schools as well. So yes, it is. We tried to look at it holistically. You are correct to look at it holistically. And I think that the schools can lead, but they will not be able to address all these issues on their own either.
Thank you, Nate, for that incredible presentation. I just want to note that I don't really see a tension between what Peter presented at the beginning, which was a clear statement of our commitment to equity, and the idea that we can't do everything all at once, because these students that Nate has presented on are clearly the ones who are most at risk of falling behind, falling through the cracks. And as we move forward with distance learning and with all the things that we're having to put in place now, instead of maybe working on these recommendations as we're away from school, that these are things that we have to really keep in mind as we do our school committee work through the rest of the year, through the summer, and into next year, because there's only going to be more social emotional needs. I have to say that the most disturbing part of your report for me is something that Diane touched upon, which was the lack of consensus around anxiety. And I really hope that as a district, we can work with parents to bring them into that loop, as I think that Diane noted that the parents are often living with these anxious children for many years before they even enter the doors of our school, and that the perfect storm of anxiety, which is, a condition that many suffer from, ends up, being from any of these outside sources, all comes together sort of in schools. And the fact that we don't have a general consensus among our educators as to how to even define or recognize those anxious kids really leaves me worried, especially being a parent to 2 of those anxious kids. It's a really big concern. So that is my parting thought. Nate, I really appreciate such a thorough look into what we're doing and what we need to be doing. And I do think this is a really timely presentation, given how much anxiety is in our community right now, just around things that are all outside of our control.
Thank you. If I could have 30 seconds just to wrap up, because just listening to your questions and listening to your closing thoughts, I think 2 things I'd like to leave you with is, 1, do not forget the commendations. You are starting from an incredibly strong place. Resources, commitment, openness, reflectiveness, honesty. So the challenges are significant everywhere, but you are starting from a much better beginning point than many of the districts we work with. Second, this universal tension of rigor versus stress, site-based versus central office. All all kids. All of these paths are possible. It's nuance. If you're just planting your flag all the way on one camp or the other, I think you just got to pause. Your path forward is part of this and part of that. I don't think you need to be lockstep uniform in every classroom across this district, but there are some things that should be a lot more uniform. And I think you can maintain very high academic rigor and excellence and reduce stress and tension at the same time. So if you're worried, and if you're pushing yourself to one extreme of the spectrum or the other, that's not what we're recommending. But it's a journey. I think you're in good hands. Happy to come back or connect in the future as you go down that path. But I will leave you to the rest of your meeting tonight. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Nate. We really appreciate it.
Tessa, if you don't mind, if I just make one final comment on that. One, I want to just thank you, Nate, and all of your team for the work that you did, and as well, Dawn and all of our SEL leadership team that we put together to be able to steer this. We had faculty from across the district and our staff participating throughout this entire process. And, your team led us through this process, Nate, but, our internal leadership team also had a lot to do with being able to bring that together. And I want to thank them for all of their time and energy in being able to do that. You talked about a couple of the universal dilemmas, when we have problems that get to solutions, and then we have dilemmas that need to be managed. And I think some of the tensions you're talking about, I think it's going to be important for us to remember that these tensions are not problems that are ever going to be solved. They're dilemmas, and they have to be managed. And I think that also helps keep in mind that it's not a binary solution at the end of this. It's not one way or the other. It's finding the middle ground that's going to work best for our community. And I think that's, just a great point that you made. And I just wanted to end with that. So thanks so much. It was a pleasure working with you, and we very much appreciate your time tonight.
You're very welcome. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda, we have a short Kelley's Corner update from Acton Town Manager John Mangiaratti. I believe he has a couple of slides to share with us on their progress.
Yes, and I'm going to bring John and Kristen into the conversation here. I just have to find Kristen. Here we go. And then I am going to share my screen.
Hi, John.
Hello. If I can remember how to use PowerPoint. I don't think I've used PowerPoint in quite a while. Oh, and that's not going to do it.
Hi, Kristen.
Hi, how are you?
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, and Kristen, I'll use my screen to manage the PowerPoint. Are you all looking at the Kelley's Corner?
Yes.
PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right, great. All right, you still see that?
Yep.
Looks perfect.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thanks for taking time. I know it's a very busy time, obviously, with what's going on, and you have a very busy agenda otherwise. Thank you all, members of the school committee, for what you're doing to help our community get through this. But there's a big project that we've been working on for many years that we were planning on talking about at town meeting next Monday. But as you know, it's been postponed to a date that's yet to be determined. So we just wanted to keep things on track and make sure you're aware of where we are with this big major project that has a major impact on the school campus. So Kristen Guichard, our senior planner, has been the lead on this project throughout the process, and she's prepared a 4-minute update for you. And then we have some time for some questions if you have any. Otherwise, we'll see you soon. But we just wanted to keep you in the loop on this very important project. So Kristen, if you could get started.
Sure, yeah, thank you. And I hope everyone's doing well during this difficult time. So to provide a quick update, at last year's annual town meeting, Acton voters overwhelmingly supported the funding for the appraisal services and additional design funds by a vote of 89%. Following that 2019 town meeting, Mass DOT announced that they would actually commit to funding the completion of the engineering design. So that really saved the town that $450,000. And due to the support shown by the community, Mass DOT was confident in the town's commitment to the project. So that's why they they offered to do that. And this was an unusual offer, and the town is very, very grateful to Mass DOT for that. In May, the town conducted a case study to look at best management practices to mitigate construction impacts to residents and business abutters. This will be an ongoing effort as we get closer to the 2022 construction start time. The Acton Water District has decided to integrate their water line replacement project with the Kelley's Corner project, so they won't be ripping up the roads again several years down the line. They'll get it all done while the project is going on. We also held a landscape design workshop in August to help define the landscape concept, which has helped to inform the 75% design plan that was submitted to Mass DOT this past December. And the town's commissioned appraisals for the property acquisitions of strips of land that the town's responsible for began in October and were just completed in February. So we can go to the next slide. It'll be slide 3. And this is really outlining what the town's next steps are. So the town's final project obligations are to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire those strips of land and temporary construction easements along portions of Main Street and to appropriate funding to fairly compensate each property owner. So the total recommended funding amount that will be brought forward at the annual town meeting, hopefully, this spring, summer, will be in the warrant for $800,000. This is based on the appraisal process that we recently completed in February. And then the remaining acquisitions along Main Street, Massachusetts Avenue, and Community Lane will be the state's responsibility. And I think we had sent, or John had forwarded a memo from us to highlight that the state is now taking responsibility of the Community Lane acquisition, which was a really, really big news for the town. Moving on to slide 4, looking at the town's investment and what that has leveraged. The town has been able to leverage $17.5 million with this project. So to date, the town has appropriated funds for concept and engineering design and appraisal services. And the remaining funding obligation, as I mentioned, for the town is really the right-of-way acquisition. So that's our last responsibility that we must do. So at this coming town meeting, voters will be asked to fund the right-of-way acquisitions for a total of $800,000. Now, following following this coming town meeting in April 2021, voters will be asked to consider funding pedestrian light poles for a total of $814,250 if they wish to implement that aspect of the plan. So, due to the commitment from Mass DOT to fund the remaining engineering design effort, the town could consider reappropriating that $450,000 that was approved in 2019 for this purpose, seeing as it's no longer needed. So moving forward from where we are today, we're looking forward to our annual town meeting. Hopefully we can have that soon. We will be submitting the 100% design plans around July timeframe, and the state will begin their right-of-way process this spring, possibly into this summer, for the remaining portions of Main Street and the entirety of Massachusetts Avenue. And this includes strips of land owned by the Acton Boxborough Regional School District, and then also Community Lane. So between July and December, the state and the town's right-of-way process will be finalized for submission for federal review. And then again, if the town wishes to implement the pedestrian light poles, we will have an opportunity to appropriate those funds at the 2021 annual town meeting. Construction advertisement is still on schedule to go out for advertising in December of 2021, and the project is still on schedule to commence in the spring of 2022. So on slide 6, we're just looking at really, we have a lot of questions that have come up to through the process with public outreach about what's construction going to be like. And there are, many details regarding construction scheduling that will be further detailed once the contractor is selected in that process with Mass DOT. But there are some items that we do know now and that we've received additional information about. And one of those pieces is that the town will be requesting and have confirmation from Mass DOT that they are in agreement that the realignment of Charter Road should be done during the summer months when school is not in session. Over the next 2 years, we will be working very closely with the Acton Boxborough School District, the Acton Police Department, as well as all the other abutters to discuss best traffic patterns and coordination with buses and efficient drop-offs. So that's something to come, but we definitely will be working on that. It will be an ongoing effort. So that's kind of our short and fast update. I don't know, John, if you have anything that you'd like to add.
No, just want to make sure that everybody's aware of where we are with the project, and that we're working very hard to work around the school and try to make the inconvenience as little as possible, understanding that it's going to be inconvenient for a few years. We're doing our best. So any input or comments or questions? Otherwise, we can keep going. I mean, we are all finished presenting, is what I meant to say.
Okay, so you're ready for questions.
Yes.
Okay, well, I don't see any hands raised on the participant thing. Adam, did you have a question?
Paul is raising his hand. Yeah. Sorry, Tessa, I couldn't find the raise hand on the queue on the.
Just so that you know, if you open the participant tab, then you'll find your name, and there's a button at the bottom that says raise hand. And the reason I say that is because when someone's sharing their screen, I can only see 4 people at a time. So if you're raising your hand, I can't see. If you're actually raising your hand, I can't see you. I would also encourage. There you go.
I was having trouble finding the participants.
That's okay. That's okay. I also would encourage. You know that we can't see you, Paul.
What?
Your video's not on.
My video's not on.
Actually, it says your video's on, but I can't see you. So I just want to encourage everyone to stick to try and keep their comments to 30 seconds or less so that we can get through the rest of this meeting. Paul, are you still there?
Am I back?
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say good job, John. I was wondering about that. I know we got a monkey wrench thrown into it, but keep your shoulder at that work, and I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have a question or comment? No. Okay. John and Kristen, thank you so much for presenting and giving us that update. It's just yet another piece of business that we've been keeping our eyes on and need to keep at somewhere in the background of knowing what's going on. So I appreciate the updates.
Thank you for your time. Have a good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Night.
Thank you.
Right.
Sorry, everyone. Apparently my community is having internet connection problems. So I'm popping in and out of the meeting here. We'll see how long I can stay connected.
Okay. Well, it's your turn, so hopefully you can stay connected through this part.
We will see how that goes. I just need to end this one presentation. And I am also, sorry, Zoom rebooted, so it's taking me an extra minute to try and get everyone who needs to be here up and running. I'm going to bring up some of our central office staff. I'm going to bring up Deb Don and Debbie Dixon to talk about some of our learning plan during the closure. And all right, and Marie will be joining us in a little bit, but I'm going to just focus on this group for right now. Here we go. And I'm going to try sharing my screen. So if I get kicked off, I guess good luck, everyone, because I'm trying to run the meeting too. We'll see how this goes. All right. So you should all be looking at the screen now, which says distance learning plan for extended closure, correct?
Yep.
All right, great. So I'll start talking, but I'm going to, ask my colleagues to jump in as they see fit. As I said before, this has been a really challenging time for the schools. And I've said this in different meetings, but if I had come to you at the end of my report of entry findings and said that, I think it would be a great idea if we stopped bringing students to our school and we went to all online learning, probably the next word out of your mouth would be, it's probably time to look for a new superintendent to schools. So, and even if I had convinced you that that might be a good idea somehow, we certainly would have been looking at multiple years to be able to plan for some type of a closure. So those are the circumstances we've been working under. And the other element, I think, is that we've been undergoing significant changes in the circumstances over the last few weeks. We were one of the first districts in Massachusetts to close back on March 12th. At the time I wrote this, it was 10 days ago. Now it's about 15 days ago. We thought we were closing for a week or maybe 2 weeks. At the time we closed, there was no guidance available to us from either the state or federal levels. And when we created our education plan, it was really with the intent that we'd be closed a week or maybe a second week. So our original planning was really just focused on structure, some connections, and some enrichment activities for our students to be able to do while they were at home. Since that time, we've learned a lot more from the federal and state levels. We know that our initial closure is at least until May 4th at this point. We all watch the news at night. So I think in our leadership team's minds, we have that May 4th date as our next benchmark, but we also know that the closure could extend longer than that. And our planning needed to be responsive to that. We have received some additional guidance from the federal and state levels, both in the forms of some Department of Elementary and Secondary Education guidance around what distance learning should look like, and then also clarity around special education for both the federal government and the state government. Our education planning clearly needs to shift at this point and make sure that we're responding to the new length of the closure. And we need to really prioritize some additional needs for structure for our students, our families, and also provide a level of consistency to their educational experience as well. So that's kind of the shifting landscape that we've been dealing with and how we're approaching the new plan. We are planning for any length of closure from here on out. So the plan you see is the intended plan, regardless of the length of closure. Even if for some reason we were to be closed for the rest of the year, this would still be our plan moving forward. Priority one is still going to be the social emotional connection for students to school and to each other. We need to make sure that we are absolutely supporting our students' families' mental and physical health during this closure. We need to continue engaging our students in meaningful learning activities and provide more structure to the day. And that's a real focus, this idea of providing more structure for our students as we look into this next plan. We have a new approach that we're rolling out, which provides more consistency to our learning goals and our plans, both through activities, content, skills, concepts, and including providing feedback to students on their work. We are taking an approach that's designed to be a consistent approach for the whole district because we need it to be both predictable for our students and predictable for their families. Some key ideas of this education plan. Each student's situation is unique and each educator's situation is unique. We know that our students are going through changing times within their family structure on a daily basis, oftentimes beyond what we can imagine. Might be happening in a home with people being ill or not having access to technology, food, resources, things like that. We need to be both flexible and adaptable as we look at this plan. Distance learning is very, very very different from traditional classroom learning, and not all students that are highly successful in classroom learning are going to be highly successful in distance learning. We have to keep that in mind. We have to make sure we continue to focus on access for all of our students. And, finally, we're in some extraordinary circumstances, and we just need to do the best we can. We can't let the circumstances mean that we don't try to do anything. We have to do what we can. People have a lot going on right now. I'm not going to get into this list, but whether we're talking about our students, families, or teachers, the list begins with worry and anxiety and social isolation, and it ends with this notion of, home and life structures have changed dramatically over the last few weeks, and people will be getting to deal with sick family members as well. So we need to consider that in our planning. We are in a time of crisis, and we cannot replicate our classrooms online. Our goals are to be flexible for our students, children, and families, and as well as our teachers, because they have the same issues that we all have. And we, again, are using a district-wide approach for consistency and making sure we provide access to our curriculum. So overall, what we're trying to do, and I'm going to throw out a couple of words here, but strike a balance between synchronous and asynchronous connections and work. Synchronous are when people learn together in real time, and asynchronous is when people are working independently on their own time. So this is a nice little infographic that we found that we thought best summarized it. But in synchronous learning, communication is happening in real time. Students are learning at the same time. We believe that it's more engaging and more effective when all kids are together, communicating together at the same time and learning at the same time. And it does allow teachers to provide that instant feedback and clarification. Some good examples would be video conferencing, live chats, and live stream videos. And then on the asynchronous side, students are learning at different times and communication is not live. It definitely, it says possibly more convenient and flexible, but it's definitely more convenient and more flexible for a lot of people because they don't have to commit to being in one place at one time. It does allow people to work at their own pace. And so some of the asynchronous opportunities that we have would be through email, screencasts. Some teachers are doing Flipgrid videos. We have blog posts, comments, articles, readings, things like that are all examples of asynchronous learning. Our goal was to create a continuum of expectations around the amount of time that students would be learning. I think it was important to really take a developmental lens to this and understand that, and I think we all do, but our kindergartners do not have the same developmental needs and ability to learn in remote areas that our 12th graders do. And there's a real spectrum in between. One of the things we talked about extensively as a leadership team is making sure we understand that anything we give to our kindergartners, first or second graders to do for learning assignments, we are also giving to their families to do with them for learning assignments. They do not have the ability to sit in front of a screen independently. Teachers cannot roll out a class at those youngest grade levels and expect to teach students behind a screen with 20 students in front of them. It just simply does not work. I can attest to that personally. My wife is a second grade teacher, and I have seen her Zoom classes when she tries to do a morning meeting and you have 15 kids spinning around in office chairs, looking at a computer screen and no ability to physically connect with them. So we have to keep that in mind as we plan time. So you can see that there's a logical progression of the amount of time. We want all of our students to have daily synchronous activities where they have an opportunity to connect with their teachers and connect with each other. This will look slightly different at different grade levels. Some grades will prioritize doing whole class meetings. Others may decide to break up the classroom into smaller groups. Just from a management perspective, it works a little better. And then in terms of work that can be done asynchronously or offline, we're really looking at a progression at the elementary level from, as little as 40 to 60 minutes a day for our youngest students, all the way up to, 90 to 120 minutes a day. And we wanted to keep the total amount of time developmentally appropriate. If you had read the commissioner's guidance that he sent out, DESE was recommending overall that schools try to replicate about half of a school day. But again, that needs to look different based on the different needs of kids. As students get into 7th and 8th grade, and then at the high school level, we are replicating more of a standard school schedule where students have periods that they can check in. but then also have asynchronous learning opportunities as well. So you can see a gradual increase in the amount of time. Again, when we put this out, we will also be providing families with offline opportunities that they can do if they want to do more learning with their child. But what we felt that what we wanted to expect from all of our students had to be reasonable and understand that, families can't necessarily stop what they're doing and two parents can't stop working for 3 hours a day to work with their kindergarten student all the time. So it's a challenge. We are going to do a Monday through Thursday contact day and a Friday professional collaboration and planning day. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think that's really important to understand the why behind it. The Monday through Thursday contact days, and this is off of one of our elementary slides. So I'm not going to get too much into what the district-wide grade level teamwork is doing. I'm going to ask Deb to talk to that in a little bit. But basically, Monday through Thursday, all students K through 12 have some daily synchronous check-ins in contact with teachers, and then they'll also have some asynchronous content as well at a developmentally appropriate level. All students will be doing some work offline, turning in assignments to teachers, and teachers will have an opportunity to provide feedback. Again, what that looks like at kindergarten is going to be strikingly different than what it looks like in 9th through 12th grade. What we have learned in this environment, it is incredibly important to make sure that our professional staff is coordinating their efforts to be able to work with all of our students. And that means there's an increased need for teacher planning and collaboration meetings. So on Fridays of each week, we are going to be doing no contact days for students. And we have scheduled meetings for all of our educators. There's school meetings that take place. There's grade level meetings and department meetings that take place across the district. So we're sharing ideas across all of our schools. There are also meetings between general education teachers and special education staff. EL staff are involved in those meetings as well, along with a lot of our classroom assistants and special education assistants. So that's a really important day for us. We chose to do Friday for that day. One, to give families a little bit of a sense of a weekend, but it also allows our educators to meet on a Friday and plan for what they're going to be implementing the following week, so that our educators feel like they get this work done ahead of actually having to fly the plane. We've talked a lot about building the plane while it's flying. We need to try and shift ourselves a little bit to building the plane before we take off. Time expectations for educators. I won't spend a lot on this, but generally, and again, this is an elementary slide, but our educators will be online in a synchronous setting anywhere from, maybe 20 to 30 minutes all the way up to 60 to 75 minutes, depending on what level of students they're teaching, whether they're elementary or high school. And then they're going to be spending as much time as they need throughout a regular workday to perform a whole variety of other tasks, including answering emails, providing feedback to students around their work. They certainly need to be learning a whole lot of digital tools right now, doing outreach with families and collaborating with colleagues. And on Friday, you can get a sense of what that looks like as well, some different meetings that will take place. More professional learning will be also taking place on Fridays. Again, all of these days are regular work days, but with provided flexibility for everyone to make sure that we can keep our educators working for the entire duration of this pandemic. We have tried to narrow some of the digital platforms that we're using so that we don't have 150 digital platforms as a district during a challenging time. For synchronous learning, our primary platform is Zoom, audio or video conferencing. We have an educational subscription to that, which provides us a higher level of safety and security than do traditional open Zoom licenses. I sent information to families about that. But we also use Google Hangouts and chat functions within the Google realm as well. For asynchronous learning, we're moving our district, and this is a transitional period towards Seesaw as a district-wide platform. We do have some educators working off of other platforms, and we're just trying to gradually help people transition into Seesaw because it's more functional and a good, secure environment for our kids. We do expect that will take some time. Grades 3 through 6 have long had access to Google Classroom, and we continue to use that. And actually, that should say grades 3 through 12, so I apologize for the typo. And then, we have one major disclaimer for our students and families. we cannot absolutely not have any recording or reproduction of our audio or video conferences. We have had some of that early on, and that is a serious issue from a student and faculty member confidentiality standpoint. We know it's very, very cute, especially in the first days of kind of digital learning. People want to take pictures of the whole class's video conference and see everyone on the screen and then post it. But we need to discourage that and make sure that that's not happening. Synchronous goals that we have, absolutely, it's about the human connection and social connection as the top priority during those sessions. And then some other uses that you'll see teachers doing during their live sessions would be social emotional connection with student. They might preview some activities that they want students to do for the learning boards that week. We have question and answer time about assignments and activities. They can clarify and extend some of those assignments and activities. And then really just be able to engage students in different types of discussions. So it's a great opportunity to get kids together and to the best of our ability replicate what students might feel in a regular classroom. We are launching, it's not quite live yet, but we will be launching this in the next 1 or 2 school days. We are launching one consolidated distance learning site that has links to elementary, junior high, and high school level that will be displayed with a prominent link on the homepage of our website so families know kind of where to go for the one-stop shopping. The elementary distance learning site is what I want to talk a little bit about next, and I'm going to invite Deb to maybe talk a little bit about what we're doing for elementary school planning, and then we'll preview a little bit of junior high and high school as well.
Hi, everyone. So at the elementary level, we have a couple of goals. And the first is that we provide some consistency across the district among all 6 elementary schools at each of the grades. And the other goal is to make sure right from the very beginning that we're planning with accessibility in mind, making sure that whatever we share out is as accessible as can be for all of our students. And so with that, we are creating some distance learning planning teams, one for kindergarten, one for 1st and 2nd grade, one for 3rd and 4th grade, and one for 5th and 6th grade, where we will provide grade-specific plans each week. But we will have 2 classroom educators, 1 special educator, 1 English language educator, a principal or an assistant principal, a reading specialist, and our curriculum coordinators involved in the planning teams. We'll also have a specialist team for art, music, and PE with a director. And that way, we are getting input from our educators, but we have special educators, reading specialists, and English language educators right there at the very beginning for us to make sure that we're making things as accessible as possible. So the idea is that each week, those teams will come together from Monday through Thursday and create a resource bank for teachers. So it's a resource bank for teachers developed by teachers for each one of the different areas that you see on your screen. There will be some activities that will need some adult support and some that might be semi-independent. Though again, at kindergarten, in 1st grade, most things will most definitely include some adult support. They'll be designed towards our grade level learning goals. So thinking about the skills that we want to continue to develop, we want to dig a little bit deeper with in order that we prevent some skill regression over this time that we're away from school. We will be using, and we see this as really a wonderful opportunity for us to continue digging into universally designed learning. So right from the very beginning, we'll start with that in mind. Again, having input from our special educators and EL educators. And then we want to strike some balances. We want to make sure that we have a balance between skills, which will be about 80% of the activities that are designated, and then about 20% on concepts and content. So nothing will be brand new for students in the sense that they won't have the skills in order to access the learning and the activities, but there might be a little bit of new content just to keep it interesting for our students. But we will be very thoughtfully thinking about the learning progressions and making sure that if a family can't partake, if a student can't partake, they won't be at a gap starting the following year. The other balance we want to try to maintain is a balance between offline and online kinds of learning activities. So thinking about getting out in nature and doing things by hand. Our art specialists were able to put together art bags this week to distribute with the lunches that were distributed. And so we're beginning to think more and more about how can we get our students involved in some hands-on kinds of projects, as well as some cross-curricular activities, which will also be displayed on these learning boards. Then each week on Thursday afternoon, the plans will be shared out to all the grade level teachers. They'll have a chance to preview all of these activities. And then Friday morning, they'll have an opportunity to meet with their grade level representatives to answer. They can answer questions for them. They can help review the activities. Teachers will then be able to choose from these boards which ones they want their students to focus on for the following week for each day. And so again, with the appropriate time of asynchronous learning, depending upon the age level. So there's a consistency across the district in terms of the learning goals, but teachers then have some flexibility for their own classroom to meet the specific needs of their students. And so they will then communicate the learning plan to their families or to their students by Sunday evening. Again, there'll be opportunities also for synchronous live time. And during that time, teachers will be able to preview some of these important activities and follow up. Students will be able to post some of their work. Teachers will be able to give feedback. So it'll be a more interactive kind of environment for students during that synchronous time. Teachers, again, will select those activities and they'll be looking for student engagement and feedback. So they can also monitor the completion of that work and stay abreast of where students are and the kinds of activities that they're completing. Again, our educators will be using the guidelines that we set forth in terms of choosing how many activities and for the amount of time. So again, they will be signing some of the activities that are on the board, not all of them. However, families may wish to supplement and to do more. That'll be families' choices, but again, they'll be set out and hopefully be as accessible as possible for all students right from the very beginning. So there'll, again, be some flexibilities for families too if they want to do more.
I just want to jump in and make one comment here, and I apologize, something's going on with my video. Right now, clearly things are not working on the tech side on my end, but we'll work on that. If you just listen to Nate's presentation about all of the different ways that our elementary schools do things, you're going to note that this is a strikingly different take on how we're approaching education while we're away. And I just think it's worth making at least a quick comment on that. One thing that we became very aware of early on was that when we are not together physically, our special educators and English language educators and assistants were having an incredibly difficult time trying to figure out how to coordinate supporting the vast number of students that they have on their caseloads across sometimes as many as 6 to 10 different educators that they work with. And it just simply wasn't working. And we actually had a lot of our special educators really just falling apart because they could not maintain that pace. It was not reasonable. They felt like they weren't serving their kids the way they wanted to. And the only way we're going to be able to coordinate services in the distance learning setting is to be able to have a level of consistency that our special educators have a glimmer of hope of knowing what's happening in each of the classrooms and an opportunity to collaborate around that in a structured environment. So I just wanted to take note because we know this is different. We said the same thing to our educators, that it's different. It's not us trying to make a statement about consistency or autonomy. It's not that big. It's just simply the circumstances we're in and a need to do things a little differently in the short term. I could talk a little bit to this now, so this, I'm going to shift into talking a little bit about the junior high and the high school. The junior high has also developed, because they have a team-based approach, they have developed their own distance learning resources website, and parents can actually go to one place and access all of the various assignments for each of the teams, look at the team schedule, and really just understand what their child's expectations are. We have the same thing for elementary, where on the elementary learning site, parents will be able to go into the grade level that their child is in and see all of the learning boards for every week. And so they have one-stop shopping in terms of understanding exactly what's going on. That was an important piece of feedback we received from parents early on, is that they were getting so many emails from different teachers across the district that they couldn't sort out exactly what their child was supposed to be doing. So we wanted to consolidate access of information as we progressed. The junior high and high school are also using a similar combination of synchronous and asynchronous learning. Their approach is still to balance the skills and content similar to elementary school. The approach to new content is nuanced, and in all honesty, it depends on the type of new content. Areas that we've talked about, I'll give a couple quick examples because they were great discussion items that we talked about with some of the department leaders and teachers in the schools. I'll talk about maybe an 8th grade social studies approach and a unit around China, and then I'll talk about a mathematics class. If we have a group of, like, for example, 8th grade social studies classes are heading into a China unit, all of the same skills that the students will need to use to study China, they already have learned when they studied Iran earlier this year. It's the same approach, but within a different cultural context. There's no issue with the students learning new content as it applies to China, because what we're not going to end up with is large learning gaps as students progress into the next course. Whereas if all of our students were about to start a mathematics unit on exponents, and that was going to be a critical piece of learning for the next course that the students would take or when they return to school. And we only offer that in the online forum, and we know that a whole number of students aren't accessing it. When we come back into school, we as a district have created a major learning gap that's a big problem for a number of our students. And so when we have issues like that, where we have major skills that students need for the next course, we've already been working with our curriculum coordinators and department leaders to know that those major skills will be taught when students return. And that in the interim, we're focused on reinforcing some other skills and introducing content that's not necessarily a critical learning path that students absolutely have to have. So there's been a real curriculum analysis that's taking place and will continue to take place to make sure that as we introduce content, it's being done very thoughtfully. And as Deb has said over and over, it's really a scalpel approach, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So that was important at those levels. As we get into junior high and high school, they have set up some rotations of classes at each school to avoid scheduling conflicts among the teachers, because if a student's teachers all schedule a class at the same time in a live session, it's just not going to work for kids. So for the junior high, school will be, quote, in session from about 9 a.m. until around 12:30 p.m. And like we do in schools, no numbers are perfect. Students will attend either 2 or maybe a 3rd synchronous class each day. That's about a 20-minute live session. So we know that we can't have students online for hours because we have families who, might only have 1 or 2 computers in the house, 3 kids, and both parents are working as well and trying to be online. So that's a challenge. The other periods in a, quote, student day are set aside for them to be able to work asynchronously. And overall, the work expectations at a junior high level are about 3 hours a day. Some days less, some days maybe a little bit more, but we're trying to replicate for junior high kids just about that sense of a half day. We know in an online environment that can be challenging. And one thing we're really asking our families to do is to reach out to teachers and reach out to the admin at the school. If they see their child taking too much time, it's important that we maintain that family connection so we can adjust the content that we're giving to kids appropriately. At the high school, they've also set up a schedule. Their in-session hours are just slightly longer. They're going to be in session from 10 a.m. Until about 2 p.m. At the high school, students will attend 2 synchronous classes each day. So kids have kind of 2 online sessions. Teachers may have more than that because multiple classes. So for example, on a Monday, high school, I believe the in-session days are going to be A and C periods. So students know when and what they're attending for class. The other periods are set aside for students to be able to work on their asynchronous work. And overall, the expectations for high school students are about 3 to 3.5 hours of work. If students are taking a heavy load of AP classes, it's probably toward the upper end of that limit, but it's going to certainly vary by student. But just a little sampling of how that's being approached at the high school level. Maybe I'll ask Debbie and Dawn to talk to this slide just a little bit. I didn't include a slide on every type of staff we had. We do have those slides because we presented them to our staff, but I do want to just give a little bit of an overview of this because I think it's an important one to touch on. Debbie or Dawn, are you there? I tell you to point at each other, but I know you can't.
We're here.
We're here. Go ahead, Debbie.
Okay. So as we received from both federal and state guidance, we are still obligated in this time of crisis to provide FAPE to our students, which means free appropriate public education. The way that we're looking to do that and accomplish that is to provide strategies that will support families in their home learning, the asynchronous learning that will be done independently or semi-independently at home. And then also to provide some direct learning services based on the students' IEPs. We know that any education or special education that we provide isn't going to look like it does during the time that we're open. So we need to make an individual consideration for each and every child on an IEP. Our teams are prepared to do that. It will take a little bit of time, but we can do this and determine how and when we will provide the services to students on top of the learning that they're already doing through Gen Ed. It's hoped that with at the elementary level, for instance, with the learning boards, that if they're prepared with universal design in mind, that they will be accessible to our students, and our students will be very successful with that learning. We can only accomplish this if we are collaborating with the classroom teachers and the related service staff like OT, PT, and speech to meet the students' needs, both in their general ed classrooms and with the specialized instruction on top of that. We'll also need to work with families to support them with the resources and other ideas. Our BCBAs are available to create structures and behavior plans for families as needed. And then we will continue to participate in grade level and department meetings. And we've also started to hold team meetings if we can. There are some challenges around that, but we're continuing to work toward that.
Speaking a little more specifically about our English language educators and our counselors, they've been connecting with classroom teachers. My EL educators said, do I have to go to every morning meeting? It's a little much. And so they're really, in a lot of ways, going above and beyond. No, you don't need to go to every one of those, but their goal is access, and how are you going to help support and scaffold the learning that's being provided. And so their participation, especially on the planning teams that Deb spoke about earlier, are going to be absolutely critical. We also talked a lot about students who are hard to engage. Our teachers are concerned about that. There still are a number of families that we're having a hard time reaching out to, or there's mixed results sort of in terms of, students logging in regularly or checking in regularly in the different ways that have been provided. And so we've encouraged our educators to, think about what are your expectations for participation and engagement, that they need to document their attempts to reach out, and of course enlist support from any of the support structures for the student, if the student's seeing a counselor or a psychologist, perhaps the building administration, and to really explore what's reasonable. We also chatted with them a little bit today about the concern that we have ongoing about the equity challenges, whether it's access, whether it's students who are caring for younger siblings, whether it's students who are working 9 hours a day at the grocery store, because they're one of the few people that want to work right now. So there are all sorts of challenges that we have to take into consideration and think about and realize, and we're not going to be able to solve that to the way that we want to right now. It's just sort of something that we have to calibrate our own expectations around. So
I wanted to add this in. We thought it was really important to be clear with our staff about some of our safety protocols. And, we wanted to just make sure that we had communicated with our staff about what the appropriate course of action was. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but we just wanted to make sure you knew that, communicating with staff that, we are making sure that we have good safety response protocols even during closure. So with that, we're happy to take some questions and, share any additional thinking with you.
Okay. I'm just going to remind everyone again to try and keep your comments, or not comments even, questions at this point to about 30 seconds or less, and to be mindful of the fact that we are already an hour behind in our agenda. So this is an important thing. I know a lot of people have a lot of questions. Just please listen to each other and make sure that you're not replicating questions. Diane, I don't know if your hand came up first, but go ahead.
Thank you. The scope of this is mind-boggling, and I just want to just say that I'm in awe of the entire leadership team and all the teachers. Really, it's just beyond comprehension, the level of collaboration that's required to pull this off successfully. Two very quick questions. What's going on with pre-K? And if, so you said new content is deferred until classes resume, but what if classes don't resume?
So, Diane, if you could just repeat the very end of that. Somehow my my tech broke up for a second.
Yeah, so my second question was, you had said that new content is being deferred until classes are resume in person. And my question was, what if we don't resume in that venue?
So I'll answer that first, and then I'll let Debbie talk to the pre-K. So, we're prepared for any length of closure at this point. We have already had conversations with our curriculum coordinators and department leaders. So they're even planning for the possibility that we will be altering our curriculum at the beginning of the school year next year to make sure that students have the appropriate learning opportunities. Oftentimes, first quarter is largely a review of some previous skills, but we know that that may need to fill in some of the gaps from this closure as well. And then Debbie, do you want to talk to preschool?
Sure. Under the leadership of Joe Gibowitz, the early childhood coordinator, preschool team is fashioning plans that may look similar in structure to the elementary learning plans. They have been actually very creative and innovative across the board, from their teachers to their speech pathologists and OTs and PTs, sharing videos and leading exercises or reading stories, having story time each day. And as you can imagine, we're talking about children who are 3 and 4 years old and who may have some challenges in learning. So it's hard. So they're working their way through it. And they are also thinking about dividing up classes and working with smaller groups as they move through this. So we'll adjust as we go. I think that's about where we are right now at the preschool level.
All right, Adam?
I want to echo Diane's comments on the gratitude that I have for the amazing amount of work that's been done. My request is that we find some way to share this additional information that we've just seen now, both in our packet and with the community. I think that this is a moving target, but the information that we just got is substantially more than what we've seen in the memo and the letter. And I think it's important for people to see all of that hard work that's been done. My question is around the synchronous learning time, particularly at the elementary age group. And that is, are we considering that we try to make that a consistent time each day? As you might imagine, we're all juggling very difficult schedules. And so it's been hard recently to have some of those times changed. And I think that that's probably going to be a consistent challenge for people. So like we see in the junior high and elementary, I guess my question is, are we looking to provide some guidance in junior high and high school? Are we looking to provide similar guidance in the elementary around consistency in that synchronous learning time?
Yes, Adam. So, great. Just to quickly hit on your first point, we're actually planning to do a webinar similar to this for families at the beginning of next week. So that, families can jump on, see a similar presentation, ask questions that they may have, and feel like they're staying informed and in the loop. We may need to split that up by grade level and provide a couple of different opportunities, because I think the concerns of some of our elementary parents will be very different than the concerns of some of our high school and junior high school parents. In terms of speaking to the consistency around elementary times, the answer is absolutely yes. The building principals are going to be working with the teachers and grade level teams to schedule some consistent times. We also know that we need to do that not only to provide families consistency for individual students, but to make sure we're not having conflicts across grade levels in computer access. So that's in process, and each school will be rolling that out separately. We just couldn't present it all here tonight.
All right, I know some of you have had your hands up longer than others, but in the spirit of fairness, Amy hasn't asked a question yet. So Amy, it's your turn.
Thanks. Yeah, tremendous amount of work. So thank you all so much for doing this. It's overwhelming how much you guys have done. My question is about the high school. So the students will be in the synchronous learning time. There'll be 2 classes a day, and the schedule that you posted looks great. And then the asynchronous times, those will be times where they're doing things in their other classes. I guess my question is are the students going to receive guidance from all of their teachers every day for something, and then only the video time will be what your schedule showed?
Yeah, that's correct. So, we're asking teachers to give students about 20 to 30 minutes a day per class of work, knowing that in-class work is different than kind of online home-based work. Any more than that really is not a reasonable expectation of kids. But they're in class, live for just about that 20 to 30 minute period with their teacher. The rest of the period, they could be finishing up some additional work for that class, or they might be working on something another teacher posted. I don't want to say that every teacher is going to post something for students every day, because they might have an assignment that could take 2 to 3 days, and that they're asking students to work over several days. But the idea is that students would have something to do in their classes pretty much each day for 20 to 30 minutes.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Angie?
Is that me? Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I also want to thank the leadership team and our educators. At this difficult time, everybody's really committed to providing the best education for our students. So my question is around the equity, because as we know that with different level and different different audience of our student, that for the education we need to deliver will be different, will have different requirements. So currently the plan is setting at a fixed amount of time, but we know that there are different level or different audience will require different time and method to deliver the same portion of education that's needed. So I want to see if that is being considered into the equity part, and also as well, is this plan will take that into consideration in the future, so there will be incremental changes in the future time?
So, we're setting forward a plan for something that's never been done before. We have no illusions that whatever we have planned is going to be implemented perfectly, implemented consistently the first tries that educators give to it. No matter how well-intentioned, there's going to be inconsistencies. And we're going to have to really read our students and look for our opportunities to continue to refine our plan as we go. We are not planning major changes to this. This will be the plan that we have as we move forward, because we just can't continue to have a moving target for our kids or for our educators or for our families. In terms of, time, the times, particularly for high school, are going to be very approximate times. Every student at that high school has somewhat different of a course load that they've selected. And we do know that students in some of our AP classes are likely to have, a higher workload as they're preparing for AP exams. And, we know that that's actually a really heavy thing for a lot of our students in those AP classes to feel prepared. So they may have more work than students in some of the other classes, but it's really going to be dependent on the student. But we felt that we needed to put out some general guidelines for age levels just to provide some general structure to the district. But certainly different courses will have some different requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Paul?
You know, I think about this, and we've just had the rug pulled out from under, you know, however many people are in our district, 30,000 people. We're all in a free fall. And what I see is a very diligent effort to make this work. And I have, I mean, I understand there are going to be some difficulties, problems, obstacles, all this kind of stuff. Just, all I can say is just keep at the diligent effort, and you know, do your best, because I just, from what I see right now, your best is pretty good.
Well, you know, thank you. And, you know, on behalf of all the teachers, you know, thank you. You know, I think we've learned, you know, that making this transition is incredibly challenging. And, you know, there have been some real pockets of extraordinary success. And then we've had some really, you know, bumpy roads that we've had to learn a lot about how to continue to do this better. And I think, you know, our goal is to continually improve, but, you know, certainly celebrate some of the successes that we have along the way as well.
All right, John, I'm going to let you go, but if you're going to stand on a soapbox and deliver like a 2-minute just statement, then I'm going to ask you to hold off.
I can mute him, you know.
Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to begin by celebrating the slam dunk, which is a schedule which respects every student's circadian rhythm. So everybody should be getting enough sleep now. And so while everybody's looking for a little bit of a bright light, you know, there's that. I also want to strongly endorse your decision to go to this 4-in-1 plan, because I do really think that strikes a good balance between allowing the collaboration. And I wanted to, you know, emphasize the point that you made that we're doing this in a really strongly aligned way. So although, as you said, that won't necessarily carry forward, you know, in exactly that way as we go forward, I hope that everybody will take from that some of the advantages of district-wide alignment. And then the question is, with respect to sort of after-school help / office hours, is there going to be some structure around that?
So, John, that's a great question. Our educators are working full days, you know, and as I said, with flexibility, because we know our educators have the same demands as every other family. But, you know, even during the non-synchronous times, students can reach out to educators and they will be responding. So, yeah, so, you know, office hours are basically anything where, you know, teachers aren't working synchronously with a class because they're otherwise occupied. You know, I didn't see hands, but I want to make one other point, because one of the questions, and we've heard this from families, is, you know, some families are struggling and would like us to hold students more accountable. Other families are struggling because they're worried about accountability and the pressure that puts on families. The language that we've used with our educators thus far and our administrators is we want expectations with compassion. And I think that's really important to understand. We, at this point, are expecting our students will be engaging with us during the synchronous times, and we're expecting our students will be engaging with teachers on the non-synchronous work or asynchronous work as well. However, we know that every student has a different situation at home and every family has a different situation at home. And we are absolutely not going to penalize people because they cannot access something or it's just not the right fit. We have some seniors in high school who have been looking forward to the spring semester of their senior year, you know, for quite a long time. And, you know, quite honestly, I feel awful for our seniors because for a vast portion of our senior class, they're losing some of their identity. We have athletes who are looking forward to their last semester. We have kids who are looking forward to music trips. You know, we have trips that we're going to be planned to go to as far away as Alaska or Spain and other elements that our kids just can't participate in. And for our kids, these are huge, huge hurdles to get over. And in all honesty, spring semester of their senior year may be the last thing that's a high level priority for them. So we may have some seniors who just say, this just isn't for me right now. I have other things I want to pursue with my life. I'm going to be honest, that's okay with us too. We want kids to engage with us. We have the expectation that they do, but everyone has a unique circumstance, and we're going to work with every family the way they need to be worked with during this closure. Sorry to pontificate there for a little bit of time, but that's something that's important to me.
You're allowed to, just not John. So I see that there are two attendees who have their hands raised, but Peter, you just touched on something that I was actually going to ask, is how are we handling, there's a lot of, in the slides, we say student expectations, and I know that there's been some talk about, credit, no credit, et cetera. How are we handling kids that aren't checking in, or that just don't want to do this because of whatever's going on in their lives, or whatever supports they aren't getting because we're not physically in school, et cetera?
I'm happy to talk to that, but I don't know if any of the other admin want to talk to it first.
Well, I know from our perspective, we will continue to reach out to the family and or the student to engage them, at least on a weekly basis, until a parent says, just don't do this anymore. We won't accept that from a child, but we will, work with the families and try to find something that will engage that student, even if it's non-academic. We want to make those connections.
Is particularly around like assignments that, teachers are maybe asking to be turned in. I mean, I suppose it's a little different at the elementary level. I don't, there's no credit, given there, but at the high school level, how hard are we holding kids to turning in assignments? If they're just, if what they can do in a week is attend the Zoom meetings and then nothing beyond that, is that the answer? Is that we're just reaching out to those families?
So, I know what the high school's approach right now is they are tracking whether or not students are completing assignments, and they're entering those, I believe, into the grade books, because that really is a primary vehicle to be able to communicate with families around what is being done or not. I know my son attends a different high school, and we don't see that stuff show up in the grade book. And, there's times when I have no idea what he's supposed to be doing right now. So I very much empathize with our high school parents around that. We're going to continue to try and work with our students and make sure that we have ways that families know what students are doing and what they're completing. But in terms of penalizing students that don't complete it, that's really not a high level of interest for us.
Okay. So we have two attendees who are raising their hands. I'm not sure how you.
Yeah, and I will. I see Michelle has her hand up. I'll allow you to talk now, Michelle. You should be able to talk if you unmute yourself. Michelle, I don't know if you can hear us or not. Something's not working there. I'm going to go on to Larry.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, Larry, we can.
All righty. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate it. So I have to say that I'm very impressed by the comprehensive plan for the distance learning. I appreciate the efforts the leadership and the staff took to drop this holistic approach and have an end-to-end education plan. So I especially like to see that the plan include a live synchronized learning environment to support our student development needs. But still at a high level is a great work. But I do think that amount of time for the live learning is far less than what should be provided to the 9th to 12th grader. I got to remind everybody that for the 2019 to 2020 school year, the high school had a schedule which consists of 6 periods per day with 50 minutes each and 5 days a week. So the total amount of time in class is around 330 minutes. So then considering what being proposed here, the 40 to 60 minutes total time per day, 4 days a week recommended, that is significantly less than what the students were exposed to previously, as less than 20% of in-class time. So my question here is that, do you think that 40 to 60 minutes is enough for our students in high school, especially students in between 9 to 12th grade, have enough for them to do extended learning and to support the wellness during this challenging time, right? We want them to remain connected with the peers, with the teachers, and with the friends. So do you think the time is enough for them to achieve that?
No, Larry, thank you. That's a great question. I think, one of the things we've tried to balance, we have, from the feedback we've received from parents, we kind of have, there's a couple different schools of thought that have been going on in the community and with our high school families. One is that, we have some people in the community who have given us a lot of feedback that they'd like to see much more online learning with a majority of the time spent live. And we looked at that, but then we also had feedback that there's a large population of our community that struggles to be in one place at a very specific time. And so the approach we've tried to take was to balance what was being done live so that there was the opportunity for that social emotional connection and to, improve student wellness. As well as, preview content, clarify confusion that students might have around assignments and work, do some teaching during that period. But then, we needed to balance that with enough time that students could work on flexible schedules. Because as I said earlier, some families have only 1 or 2 computers in the house and they have multiple students trying to get on at the same time. So, it was really a tightrope that we're walking. I think, as high school teachers settle into that schedule and students settle into the schedule, there might be some minor adjustments to that, but I think that's kind of probably going to be the right balance, at least for now. But thank you for that question. Oh, Tessa, you're muted.
Michelle shows up on my screen as being there. I don't know if she is.
I think Michelle put her hand down, maybe.
Oh, okay.
So
she just shows up as not as her hand down, but she shows up as a square on my screen now.
She just commented that she accidentally raised her hand.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Lily,
there we go.
Lily Chen did submit a question on chat. How are our high schools' distance learning time compared to neighboring towns? As far as I know, Concord and Lexington both have longer synchronized learning time than us.
I think every town that we've talked to has approached this a little bit differently, based on some of the feedback that they've gotten from different community members. There are a couple communities that might have longer times, but we're probably right about in the middle in terms of the amount of synchronous time. So, we do talk to superintendents. I actually talk to superintendents in all of the neighboring towns, probably 3 times a week. We're on the phone with each other. What's been really interesting is I've gotten multiple communications from the superintendents in other towns that say, boy, I heard AB is doing all of this stuff. Is that really true? And I've said, actually, no, it's not. We're not doing what you think we are. So I think, my experience is that, families in every community have some slightly different experiences and they may relay those. And I would urge people not to think that when they talk to one person in a community that necessarily represents everything that's happening in that community or even what's happening officially in a community.
All right, Angie and Paul, I see that you both have your hands raised, and I just have to ask, is it really an important question? Because when I say that we're more than an hour behind, I'm not kidding. We still have to debate and discuss what we're doing moving forward with all-day kindergarten, and we have all of Dave's slides to look at as far as the revolving accounts, and we are far from done. So is it a question that can wait or that you can address to Peter later?
I think it's valuable. Maybe Peter can update us on the communication map for the community.
So the communication map is still in place. That's actually something that we'll probably send out again to all families once we get into this next phase of the learning plan. I think, what's been great is I love it when parents reach out to me. And, I love being able to talk to parents as much as possible. But, my worry as we get into this is, the volume of email is a little bit unsustainable. right now. We can only get to so many people in a day. And, I think we always want to make sure that people start with their classroom teacher. If that doesn't get resolved, then talk to either a department head or a building administrator. And if it's not resolved at that point, we want to, make sure we're resolving that at central office. But thank you for bringing that up, Angie, because that is a very, very important point, and possibly a life-saving one for all of us.
All right. So I think that we are ready to move on to the next item on our agenda, which was supposed to occur at 8:05. So that would be new business. And Dave is presenting us with a school closure finance update.
All right. So I am going to promote Dave to be a panelist, if I can find him. Here he is. Here comes Dave. Dave, did you need, I know you're muted now, but did you need anything on your screen for this? Marie, I'm going to bring you in as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was intending to share the same screen that we went through last night with the budget subcommittee.
All right. And so you should be able to share your screen now, Dave.
Okay. Should we go right into that?
Yeah. And Marie, I promoted you to be a panelist as well.
Hi, Marie.
Hi, everyone.
All right. So can you see what's there? Okay.
Yep.
Angie nodded, so we'll go with that. What I have is a 3-tab summary of the special revenue funds for the district. The operating budget analysis will be coming. This is the one that's taking the biggest hit right now, because we're going to have what we've done in these projections is made the assumption that we're not going to return to school this year. So this will hopefully be the worst case scenario for each of these revolving funds. These are fee for service, tuition based, or state funded programs, as you'll see. So I'm doing this consciously in the same order that I did them last night, just to be able to go through some of the less controversial ones, if you will, more quickly, and you'll get a handle for the flow of how this is laid out. I've captured some plain English captions for the items of revenues and expenses. We've put in last year's totals. We've put in this year's year-to-date numbers, what we've projected from here, what we've encumbered, I should say, from here to the end of the year, and then what our final projection is as of now for FY20. So we start with school choice. We are expecting $101,000. That's on the cherry sheet. No change to that. We budgeted for $150,000 of salaries. So at the end of the year, although there's a deficit projected for this year, number one, it's not shutdown related, and there will still be a positive fund balance at the end of this year. And I guess if Testa, you just give me the go ahead like last night, I'll move on to the next one.
I don't see any. I don't see any hands raised right now. So
Okay, thank you. All right, the next one is athletic revolving. From the revenue side, you'll see that some of these other programs, as you know, as you voted for pre-K and all-day K at your last meeting, some of these programs will need to refund money, and we'll get into the reason for that. Athletics doesn't. They didn't collect their spring fees yet, so this represents the first 2 seasons worth of revenues, and the first 2 seasons worth of expenses with some encumbrances still out there. The revolving funds generally get posted on a monthly basis, or less often, I should say, than the operating funds. So we've got some encumbrances that when this report was run, we're still there. This does not, so projection for salaries in the revolving fund, this does not include any stipends for the spring season for coaches. There's a small stipend that's a leftover from the winter season, but there are no spring season stipends included. And you see a notation on what primarily we have still encumbered from the winter season. It turns out to be a $64,000 loss this year, expenses in excess of revenues. We had a positive fund balance beginning the year, but that's going to flip to a negative fund balance projected to the end of the year. Again, that's without any salaries if the committee decides to fund any or all of the spring coaches' salaries. $17,000 deficit. I guess I'll move on, Tessa. Circuit breaker is probably the easiest one to go through. This, as of last night, I talked about the first 2 quarters of reimbursement revenue having been received, and I said the third quarter was imminent. We got it today, and it was more. We had an audit of the circuit breaker reimbursement claim a month or so ago, and the reimbursement revenue that we'll receive will actually be a little bit higher, and coincidentally just over the amount that we've budgeted for use of circuit breaker to offset tuitions. And so it's essentially a break-even projection for the year, and we'll have a healthy balance of circuit breaker in the fund balance in the event it's needed to cover tuition overruns from the operating budget, and more about that as we get into analysis of the operating fund. Questions?
Adam, did you want to ask a question, or did you change your mind?
I'll ask it briefly. I asked it last night, but I just wanted to get Dave's clarification again for the whole group. Because this is a reimbursement, we are still incurring these expenses this year, so we wouldn't expect to see a decrease in these reimbursements as we move into next year, correct?
It's a decrease in this. Yeah, you're reimbursed this year based on last year's costs. So next year's reimbursement will be based on this year's cost. Perversely, if you're just looking at making as much circuit breaker money as you can, the more costs you have, the more reimbursement you have. Doesn't make sense. You want to minimize costs because the reimbursement is at best about 75%, not 100%. But the answer to your question is yes, Adam.
Thanks.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let's go to food service. Food service. This data was compared with the reports that Kirsten submits to the USDA, and she's projecting a deficit at the end of the year of about $485,000. Where does that come from? It comes from the fact that last year we had almost $1.8 million of revenue. This year, with over a third of the year not being able to serve lunches, she's not going to make the revenue that she did last year. There is the federal and state grants are reimbursed on a monthly basis. There were some more revenues that were accounted for that were not received and booked to Munis yet. Small dollars. The revenues that Kirsten reported reflect the fact that people have money on account on their children's accounts. At the end of time, we would refund that, but we'll assume that people will leave the money on account and use it again someday. But there isn't any refund needed for presentation of the numbers here. On the expense side, again, assuming that we're paying all the staff and with no need to buy food to feed all the students for the rest of the year. There's a small reduction in expenses. It's mostly food costs. And there's the resulting $500,000 thereabouts of deficit. The good news is that the fund balance should still be positive by the end of the year. She had a very strong fund balance going into the beginning of this year, and will come out of it in the black.
All right, Dave, I see Diane has her hand raised.
Okay.
Just a quick question. Looking back on to Budget Saturday, the report from the Food Services Department was that there was a pretty significant drop at the high school in lunch, in the purchase of no, it was breakfast, I think. Was that a free program, or is that paid people, something people pay for?
I think it's a combination.
Okay.
It's not a significant revenue producer or cost.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the community ed programs. There are 4 of them. The regular classes, use of facilities. Erin oversees the rental of the buildings for outside groups. Driver education speaks for itself, and the extended day program. This is the second year of that being run under community ed. And you can see that in the case of the classes and the extended day program, if we do not go back, then these fees that were collected that are in these numbers would have to be either returned or credited, but in any case would not count toward FY20 revenue. There are some fees that Erin has invoiced recently that relate to use of the facility before the shutdown. And so that one actually has some money coming back in. But in general, there's a huge drop off in revenue if we don't reopen the school in all of the community ed programs. On the expense side, again, with the assumption that we're going to pay the staff, we won't pay. We likely will not pay the contracted instructors, which is why this number's down from FY19. And so in total, the expenses are down slightly, not anywhere near the amount by which the revenues are down. And projected deficit now of, again, about $500,000 for all of the programs combined. We started the year with 2.4 million combined. If you take out 479 of projected loss, and also the transfer of the utility subsidy of the operating fund comes out of the extended day fund. That's a significant amount of money to lose in 1 year, but the operations will still have a combined positive fund balance, a significant one at the end of this year.
Paul has his hand raised, and Diana, if you don't have another question, can you just unraise your hand? If you do have another question, that's fine, leave it up. But Paul, go right ahead.
So I take it then with driver's education, I imagine those 16-year-olds don't have an alternative either. So they're just not going to get their licenses. Is that going to be the way it is?
I believe the driver ed classes are continuing online. I can't tell you, Paul, what that means as far as programmatically, whether they're able to take their tests and all of that. I would. It's getting late, but I'll just say this quickly. It's probably a pretty good time for kids to learn how to drive if their parents can take them out. Not a lot of competition on the roads and whatnot.
Thank you.
Adam, one thing for you too is you asked the question about last night about this line here, and I'll assume you remember what it was. That there was a $45,000 credit in there that I've moved down to here. And I think you have this, and I think you're able to read the note, but that was the answer to your question that you asked last night.
Thank you.
Christine Russell has chimed in that the RMV has put a stop to driving tests at the moment.
There you go.
Lots of time to learn.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tessa. All right, we're in the home stretch on the last tab of my spreadsheet. Let's start with the ODP program. Not a lot to talk about here. As a matter of fact, I took the numbers off Munis and just carried them forward, and on the assumption that we have no further tuition revenue, there'll be a fairly nominal deficit, but the fund balance was healthy, and we'll have a positive number going forward to next year. Preschool, let's move this in. There wasn't the need for a lot of refunds to be made to pursuant to your last vote. They were collecting pretty much month to month, and so there were some refunds that needed to be made, but not a lot. If you look at this, it's about 2/3 of the revenue of last year. That seems to make sense relative to the number of days we operated this year. The expenses are pretty close to what it was last year, and so we're projecting $123,000 deficit for the year. The fund had $200,000 to begin the year, so we'll still end up with a positive fund balance at the end of the year. And item last. So all-day K is one where we have a problem. You can see that if we do not reopen, the school committee's vote to waive the April tuition has been acted upon, and refunds sent or monies not collected. In some cases, we had wires reversed. We've also determined what the refund would be in the event we don't reopen, and it wasn't a simple matter of just adding 2 months. It was looking at how many days we were open this year divided by 180, and came up with how much did we actually earn. And that number comes out to be $609,000. Once again, the sanity check, that's about 2/3 of last year's total. We were open for about 2/3 of the year. If we make the assumption that we're going to pay all the staff, there are encumbrances in there for the run out for this year. And we would project that the total expenses for the year would exceed revenues for the year by $441,000. In this case, we didn't have sufficient fund balance at the beginning of the year to cover all of that. And so we're projecting at the end of the year a deficit balance in this program, in this fund, of $68,000. Questions about FY20 before we move on?
I don't see any.
Okay. Let me shrink the screen a bit. One more. This might be getting too small. I'll go back up one.
And we could see FY21 before.
Okay. I couldn't see it because your pictures are in the way on my screen. So what I've done is done 2 columns here projecting FY21 all-day K program. And in the first column, I've projected it assuming that the tuition stays at $4,500, which is where it is this year. The second column assumes that the reduction, the tuition reduction that you voted at the last meeting, stays in effect or goes to $3,750. There's a significant difference with 204 estimated students paying tuition, next year. You can see the difference when we multiply 204 by the total tuition. The expenses are going to be less because we moved $180,000 worth of salaries to the operating budget. In the case of keeping tuition level where it is this year, we would still have a deficit. It would be a manageable deficit of about $40,000. In the event the tuition reduction goes through, the deficit would be projected at almost $200,000. And you can see across here the ending fund balance projected at the end of this year and projected at the end of next year under either of those 2 tuition assumptions.
And if I can just jump in on that, Dave, this leads us into one of the things that we had put on the agenda was a possible vote. And we had listed that because, it was still early in the thinking process and we hadn't had an opportunity to review this information with the budget subcommittee. But budget subcommittee met yesterday, and so we're actually not recommending that you vote on this tonight, but instead we wanted to present, a series of options, and these are outlined in the memo that we provided. But the recommended action is really for a future meeting at this point, and we would recommend that the school committee provide some more guidance to us around preferred strategies to bring the all-day K revolving fund back to a positive status. Again, I don't think that needs to be tonight, but certainly at a future meeting, we will want that. Some of the options that we talked about, first we talked about the committee could decide to revisit the decision to reduce the all-day K tuition for FY21, but there are other options as well. We could determine not to provide the same refunds for all-day K students that we had previously voted at a previous meeting. Our all-day K students are participating, the same as our half-day kindergarten students, in the educational programming that's taking place while we're closed. So the committee could determine that we don't want to provide a full refund of that because students are still receiving education services even during the closure. Another way that we could do close this gap is to replenish some of the revolving fund deficit from our district reserves moving into next year. But we could also make, reductions to the FY21 operating budget to offset deficits in the all-day K account. So there really is a range of options, and we wanted to put that range of options on the table for you. You're certainly welcome to discuss it, but we did pull back any recommendation we had for a formal vote on it tonight, knowing that we wanted to, reflect a variety of options for you to consider.
Can I just ask that if we're going to have a discussion now, that Dave not share his screen, because it's really hard to see everybody. Like, I can only see 4 people at a time, knowing that people might need to look at it again. But thanks, Dave, or Peter, or whoever took care of it. So I think right now we just want to have a discussion around people's thoughts, what you're thinking as far as this goes. I mean, there is a significant deficit that needs to be addressed in some way or another, and there will be effects on other programs depending on how we decide to, or could be potential effects on other programs depending on how we decide that we want to handle the deficit in this revolving fund. So Nora, I saw your hand first. Go right ahead.
I have a question, just a point of clarification. Peter, when you said that the all-day kindergarten students are receiving the same educational opportunity now as the half-day, did you mean the same, or is the all-day kindergarten receiving something more than what the half-day is receiving?
No, all of our kindergartners have the same opportunities to access education while we're closed.
Both half and full are the same?
Half and full are the same access right now. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Adam?
Yeah, so I have lots of thoughts on this. At first, I wonder, and so I guess what I want to do is just sort of throw out some of those thoughts for everyone to consider. And I do appreciate the fact that we don't need to make a decision tonight. And so I'm just trying to provide some of my thinking on this. The first was a suggestion that we don't refund the all-day K tuition, but really with the recognition that there are probably some families who are in a point of hardship, and they may need that money. And so, to ask those families that are experiencing a hardship to reach out to the administration and have those cases reviewed on an individual basis. That's one idea I'm having. The other thing that I think it's important that we keep to our commitment towards getting to free all-day kindergarten. And so to keep to that commitment, I think that we should do whatever we can to commit to that lower tuition for next year. And then my last thought and question and area for discussion is we're looking at $200,000 of a deficit, and knowing that we have a very healthy reserve balance, and we did just set a policy for that reserve balance of what percentage of our budget we wanted it to maintain at. But I guess my question is, isn't this what that reserve balance is for, is to help us meet some of those shortcomings? And so making a thoughtful decision about how do we support the families, move towards free all-day K, maintain the level of programming that we want, and use our reserves to help support
that. Jenny, I'm going to call on you next because you haven't had a chance yet to speak at all, knowing that John and Diane, I see your hands as well. You're muted.
Thank you. Thanks. I want to agree with everything Adam said. I think that we have to consider the long-term consequences of this pandemic, not just financially in our families, but in every other way. And, you know, I think that our commitment to offering universal all-day kindergarten is more important than ever. At least it is to me. In terms of the refund, I don't know how in good conscience we could not refund all-day K tuition to all families who paid for it, because at this point it doesn't, you know, it's not possible or probably wise to try to give all-day K students more than is deemed developmentally appropriate for students that age. So, I mean, otherwise, I think you'd have to look at it as a donation that we're taking from all-day kindergarten families that we're not expecting from any other family. So I don't know if there's a justification for not just returning that money. I'm open to hearing it, but otherwise, I agree with everything Adam said. Thanks.
John?
I think that I agree with the point that Adam made about reserves, and, you know, thinking about what Dave described generally, those other funds are okay precisely because we're allowing the reserves that happen to exist associated with those accounts to be reduced. And then the other thing is, I'm very glad we're not making a decision tonight, because it seems to me that this decision really needs to be seen in the context of the entirety of the budget, that it's just not appropriate to say we're going to deal with this independent of everything else.
Diane?
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay, I thought I was. Okay. I want to make a point, and I guess maybe I need a point of clarification from the leadership team on all-day K and the half-day versus the full-day program. So the statement was they're receiving the same, but this has always been true. They don't, so my understanding is, because of the model we now have, all-day K kids are not provided with new content. So the second half of the day is maybe review of concepts and increased socialization, increased structured time, you know, maybe some coverage for working parents. Is that the case?
Do you mean under normal operations? Or
Yeah, under normal operating.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So in that case, they are getting more. They're just not getting more content because of the model that we have set up. So I don't see how we could not refund them, because they're not getting what they what they have been getting for the second half of the day. I agree with Adam as well. I really, I'm not comfortable giving something and then taking something away. That the reasons that we committed to reducing tuition are sound. We're providing waivers already to our the people who really need it the most. But there's a whole group in the middle that is struggling to meet this need, and they have even more needs now that the economic situation is what it is. So the use of E&D makes sense to me. This is what it was for, one-time expenses. So unless someone tells me that this is an ongoing thing, then this would be an entirely appropriate use of E&D. The 180 wasn't entirely an appropriate use of E&D, since that gets absorbed in the operating budget. But this, my understanding is that this is different. So before making cuts, certainly I would want to pull it out of E&D. So that's my 2 cents.
Angie, do you have your hand raised?
Yeah. Actually, I'm just gonna propose that we can have another time, because I would like to see this one from a more whole picture, and with the right now is 10 o'clock. So I was wondering if we can hold the subject and be able to talk about it later.
I don't want to hold the subject, but I think that we should complete having the discussion that we're going to have tonight, but we're not going to vote on it, as Peter mentioned, that the vote can wait. But I do think that we've been presented with all the information now. I recognize that it's 10 o'clock. We had a lot of discussion around other things that maybe didn't quite impact our budget quite as much, but I do think it's an important discussion to have. Just as a counterbalance to what Ginny and Nora shared earlier, I guess I was looking at the refund of this as looking at it from the perspective of the teachers that we have been paying as full-time teachers the entire year. We have only one half-day teacher in our entire district. And so the teachers that are working on teaching our students are being held to the same standards as all the other 1 through 12 teachers that we have in our district. And so I'm not suggesting that certainly that we don't take a look 100% at families that are in need right now that need this money as a refund because their families are struggling or whatever. And I don't want to look at as others that don't need it as a donation, but I do want us to consider that when we run this program as full day, which is essentially what we're doing, even though the content isn't full day, the teachers are full day and they're being held to the same standards, not as half-day teachers, but as full-day teachers as the rest of our staff. And so we agreed to pay them that way, and they are being paid that way. So that's the other side of it that I just think we need to consider. Or did you have something else that you wanted to follow up with?
You talked to me? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to weigh in on the sort of what my current thoughts are on the reduced tuition that we talked about for next year. And I'm would say that I'm leaning really strongly to preserving what we worked on. And even though we're in such a crazy time of chaos right now, that felt like a decision that was a long time coming and took a lot of work to get there. And it was a small step toward where we want to be. And I would like to protect that and not take a step backwards if at all possible. It's sort of where I'm leaning on that. I don't know about the refund part. I don't have thoughts on that. I mean, obviously I'd like to have a refund if that makes sense, but that doesn't seem as clear to me as the other part of it.
You know, if I can just add one thing to this too, you know, I think, you know, we're at a point of crisis right now in the world where I think we all want to try and do something and we want to try and react quickly to things. But, you know, if I could somehow read Dave's mind, it would be that it's probably wise to slow down the decision-making on something like this because, you know, there may be stimulus money coming in some form or another. You know, Dave, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing that's what you're thinking.
Amazing. You're a mind reader. Yeah, I mean, nothing has come down yet, but $2 trillion has been authorized from Washington. I don't know how much of that is going to the state and Massachusetts specifically and to cities, towns, and districts. But it stands to reason, as somebody who went through in 2009, there was stimulus money, and they are talking about it. They're not. There's nothing concrete, but I think it stands to reason that there will be some means of putting districts that are suffering a lot of financial loss through this crisis, especially if it goes through the end of the year. And the one thing the asset that we do have now, that we seem to have now, is time. So probably we'll be reporting to you about measures, about plans to provide funding to districts as we go along.
And I was just about to suggest that we move on. Is it something that needs to be shared? because we're going to continue this. We're going to continue this discussion another time. We're not going to vote tonight. So if you'd like to share, and it's something that you need to share, you're certainly more than welcome to. But we still have an executive session ahead of us. So good. Okay. So item 4.2 is policy subcommittee. There is the first read of graduation requirements. We are delaying the request to name the pool. The hope is that we can do that at a meeting where where we can be in person and we can have participation from the members of the community that have things to share on that. So, Amy, do you want to introduce it, or should we go right to Deb?
Amy, can I make a suggestion on this? Can I make a suggestion that we table this discussion for tonight and do it at a future meeting? I'm going to be really honest with you. I sent Deb home after she presented previously. She's defending her dissertation in the morning.
Oh my gosh.
And I can't imagine what it's been like for her during this closure, being kind of the lead curriculum person in a district and preparing to defend a dissertation in the same week. So when we were done with that, I sent her home, and I just don't think this is important to be urgent right now. Or it's important, but not urgent.
I agree.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Good luck to Deb.
We have draft minutes of the meeting on March 19th in the packet. If anyone's willing to make a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll do a roll call vote then. I'll call on each of you and ask for your vote. Paul?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
Don?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Jenny?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Maya?
Yes.
Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, that was unanimous. Superintendent evaluation implications of school closure. Well, since I don't really even remember at this part of the evening what I was going to say about that, is just that if we had been in having regular sessions and not discussing this for the last 2 weeks, certainly I would have been giving you a much clearer update on where we were in the superintendent evaluation process, as well as how we were going to handle that going forward the rest of the year. Clearly, this is all going to have some implication on Peter's goals and how much he's able to get done this year, but there's additional things to be evaluated in how he's handled the crisis we found ourselves in. So I'm just going to share that we'll be sharing more guidance on what that's going to look like after we have some time. Peter and I have some time to talk, I think. And I don't know if the MASC is going to come forward. Diane, I don't know if you know anything, if the MASC will come forward with any additional guidance on how to handle superintendent evaluations this year. But for sure, there's more information to come as to how we'll handle that. But now elections aren't happening till June 2nd, and so the committee is going to remain as a whole for much longer than we would have been a whole committee had Acton town elections already happened. So to be continued, if that's okay with everybody. We have subcommittee and member reports up next. I don't know if, I know that Boxborough Leadership Forum has not met. CPAC has not met, although I know that there has been additional guidance about special education. We did touch on that a little bit tonight. I don't know that we want to touch on that anymore right now. Budget, we've already covered what we talked about in budget yesterday when we met. That was Dave's presentation. So, Peter, are there any updates on the school building?
I don't think there's anything critical right now. The biggest thing is that the pricing set has gone off for another round of cost estimating. We are expecting that at an upcoming building committee meeting to be able to come back, or the building committee will have another round of possible value engineering, making some additional design decisions based on cost estimates. But outside of that, everything is still on target. The work is being done by the architects, project managers. Consigli's working behind the scenes as well. We continue to be on target despite our school closure.
Okay, statement of warrants. I don't have anything for me to share what the statement of warrants is. So it went out electronically and a bunch of us signed it. I know that Adam had asked that possibly the whole thing go out to the school committee next time so that everybody had an opportunity, if not to electronically sign it, but be able to read. Yes, Dave says that's a good idea. Okay.
Tessa,
Yep.
I apologize. I'm going to answer John's question. The
Sorry, I
proceeds.
couldn't see. Yeah, go
The
ahead.
proceeds from the bid of the project were received. They've been deposited into the account at the state level with the depository account, and Dave has developed a set of procedures and controls for that account and how we'll process transactions through the project.
Okay. Peter, I assume you don't need to mention anything else under the FYI.
Thank you, John.
Peter, you don't have anything else to mention under the FYI?
I don't. I don't. You know, it's been busy day at a time right now.
All right. So as posted, we have the need for an executive session tonight. I'm sorry. Pursuant to MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Acton Boxborough Education Association, ABEA, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, and the Acton Boxborough Office Support Association, OSA, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the committee. Is there a motion to adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so we're going to do a roll call vote, and because of the situation, we would ordinarily return to an open meeting for the sole purpose of adjourning, but we are not going to do that tonight because it's very complicated being able to do that, leave one Zoom meeting and go to another. So now we'll do the roll call vote to leave. Paul?
Tessa, before you do that, I'm so sorry, but you do have one attendee with a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. When I look at the whole screen, then I can't see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I believe it's Jin May.
Okay. Go ahead, Jin May.
She's muted.
Jin May, you're muted, but if you unmute yourself, then you can speak.
Thank you, but I'm just listening. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. No problem.
Okay. Okay, so now we'll do a roll call vote to adjourn to our executive session. Paul?
Yes.
Adam?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Diane?
Yes.
Angie?
Yes.
Ginny?
Yes.
Nora?
Yes.
Michael? Michael?
Oh, Michael, there you go.
Yes.
Maya?
Yes.
And Amy?
Yes.
So where's the link to join that meeting?
Yes. Peter sent it to us, but it also was at the beginning of the chat, right? Did you resend it, Peter, or no?
Yeah.
That I did. I put that one into, I can send it as an email again. It was sent as an email maybe a couple days ago. But let me,
to the panelists.
Adam put it up there.
Okay.
So how do we link on that, Adam? I see it shows up as a link, but I don't even see how to.
We just leave this meeting and then put that into your browser.
I know, but how do you even copy it?
Oh, you can